In a world where horrid stenches and piercing screams come not from the realms of fantasy, but from the nightmare of reality. Come two heroes, bonded by love and the kind of desperation only parents can know.
No! God, please, no! No! No!
Behold, RPGs and Baby Makes 3, the greatest podcast in the history of all podcasts, by parents who have made a podcast about being gamers with a baby. Did I mention it's a podcast? Here are your hosts, Gretchen Hilmers and Rob Hessler. Edition Wars.
And that's right, this is Edition Wars, RPGs and Baby Makes 3. Finally, after months of trying to make this happen, we finally gathered up a number of folks to talk about the various editions.
4
editions?
No, 4 folks.
Well, still, 4 folks, that's a lot.
Do we count? So 6?
So 6.
Okay, 6 folks.
So yeah, let me just say, first of all, thanks to Chris and Endre. Chris is from England, and Endre is in Norway, and the two of them, and Gretchen and I, talked about AD&D 2nd edition.
Yeah, I stumbled through that one. And also some of the earlier editions as well. Kind of put them all together. Oh, I stumbled through all the editions. Okay,
yeah,
cool.
Yeah.
Would you say I stumbled through them like a toddler?
Like a drunk Kender. Which is
So
kind of a toddler.
Yeah.
Thanks to Amanda Plageman, our frequent guest and sort of third member of our podcast team, for coming on to talk 3.5 and Pathfinder. And then finally, thanks to Kat Valentine, a member of Nerd Asylum and a big-time part of the Savannah gaming community.
Rob, if we're talking about Kat, it was 7 folks because her son made an appearance.
That's right. Her son, who's also named Lincoln, like our son, made an appearance. And she talked 5th edition with us. So thanks to all of them for coming on. And this is like a D100 of an episode. Like, you know, the big fat golf ball size D100?
Yeah, I got you one, and it just keeps rolling across the floor until it bumps into something and
It's so cool, and I rarely use it because it's so impossible to use. And also, you could, like, accidentally kill yourself by hitting your, it's a weapon.
Step on that, and you're done.
Seriously, you're doing a D100 damage if you throw that at somebody. So, yes, this episode's going to be almost 3 hours long, so bear with us, but it is an edition war. You be the judge. Listen up.
And if you can tell me how many times I say Thaco in this episode, I'll figure out something cool for you.
Okay. Yes. All right. If somebody tells us how many times you say Thaco in this episode accurately, then we will give them a prize.
Yeah.
Send us an email, rpgsandbabymakes3. And before we get started, I just want to ask you all a favor. Go on and subscribe to our podcast. Subscribe on YouTube.
I'm not going to beg.
I'm begging.
Please
dude.
go do it. Please. Please.
Please. Do it. Subscribe on YouTube. Subscribe on wherever you get your podcasts, iTunes, whatever it is. And leave us a 5-star review, because that really does help. It gets the message out there to people. If you like this podcast, then, it's better if more people listen to it. We can do more, and it helps us get other guests and stuff like that, which we do have some. But let's get into this week's episode here.
There's just a lot of beef. It's a whole cow.
This is a huge beef. I mean, this is like a beefalo. This is a beefalo.
What's it even mean?
Nobody knows.
I don't even know what that means.
No one knows what it means, but it's provocative.
No, it's not. It's
Gets
gross.
the people going.
It's
No,
disgusting.
that's enough!
We're going to go in order. We're going to start with AD&D 2nd edition and the earlier editions. We will go to 3.5 in Pathfinder, and we'll finish on 5e. Enjoy, people.
Edition Wars.
Advanced Dungeons and Dragons 2E.
Edition Wars, 2nd edition, and to a certain extent, all OSR games. We are representing them right now. And of course, along with Gretchen and I, we have Endre, who is in Norway, and Chris, you're in somewhere in England. I'm not sure where in England.
Middle
England. Okay. And Chris, Endre, and I play in a game which I often talk about. It's such an awesome Ice Barbarian 2nd edition game that we've been
playing. We talk about it all the time.
It's my favorite game.
Nice. Yeah.
Gretchen knows it's my favorite game.
So exciting. He's so into it. It's like a little boy. Listening to a little boy talk about a game. Loves it.
You're embarrassing me.
The best thing in the world is to listen to somebody talk about their game which you're not playing in.
You know what? The 3 million people who watch Critical Role every week would disagree with that sentiment, even though I know you're being sarcastic when you say it. I can't watch. I can't do it. I've tried, but I really can't listen to actual plays because it just makes me want to play the game. Like, I just feel like, where's my character? I want to roll some dice. Let's get going.
I agree to an extent, but I think that some people do it as like you listen to it and it sounds like just radio. Like radio theater. I don't know if you say that in English, but we have that here anyway.
Yeah,
like
old school
radio play.
dramas.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. But then other people do it, and you can hear the dice, and they're more like around the table. Then you want to play, I think.
True enough. And I think that Critical Role does a decent job of making it seem a little bit radio-y play because they have the voice actors and stuff. But who cares about that crap? Because that's 5th edition, and we're here to talk about why 2nd edition is the best edition of D&D. So let's dive right into it. First of all, THAC0. I mean, THAC0 is the best thing ever. Right, Gretchen?
I love it. But then again, I usually don't play classes where it comes into play a lot.
True enough, you're playing a wizard. So THAC0, for those who don't know, and if you don't know, then you should pick up a 2nd edition book, is 2-hit armor class 0, which was a mechanic that we, in 2nd edition, knew because it was descending armor class.
Yeah.
And
which I love.
Yeah, that's what we're going to talk about that too. So now, Chris, I know you're an old school gamer. We're going to talk mostly about 2nd edition, but I know you really came up in 1st edition. In fact, you've been running us on a 1st edition module for the last little bit. There was no THAC0 back in the day, though. There was just the big chart.
Yes, otherwise known as the Matrix.
Really?
Yes, the attack matrix. Yeah, but I cut my teeth on basic D&D and then threw it up into, I think it was intermediate, and then my group, which were much older than me by a few years, were kicking off to advanced first, and then by the time I came to an age where I really could run a game, it was just developing into 2nd. But the armor class and the THAC0 system ran throughout them, and were reduced from a matrix into just a single number, and thus removing all the need to calculate over excessive armors. If you lost a bit of armor, you could just modify your armor class. If you improved, it just got better a bit. So you didn't need to track how much armor damage took and things like that. So in a way, it was quite fluid and was not necessary to have a hit location chart either, which I thought was just an extra ball ache.
Well, and I think that kind of hits on one of the core reasons why I think 2nd edition is so good. And that's why we're talking about 2nd edition as opposed to something like basic or 1st edition, is that up until 2nd edition, and including 2nd edition, it was all an extension of the original rule set. They're all essentially compatible. For example, and for those who have listened to the podcast a lot, and I've been running, I just recently ran Castle Amber for my 2nd edition AD&D group, and that's a basic set adventure, but they're compatible.
There's nothing basic about that in story, though.
Do you believe they were an interesting set of French writers as well? if memory serves me right, Castellamber was written by a French.
It's the Averone Archives and now this is terrible. I must know.
It's where we see the origins of Dungeons.
You didn't tell Rob there'd be a test.
I know, seriously. There's who told me I was going to have math on this? Clark Ashton Smith. And yeah, it's based in France. I mean, the whole thing is based in France throughout these various different times. Yeah, and so I mean, but that's what some of the great things. So by the time we got to second edition, it had been like, first of all, second edition lasted for 12 years. So you have a ton of material, but also it was kind of like it had been play tested for 14 years before you even made it. It wasn't like something new. It was a polishing up of what had been practiced for so long, and sort of a consolidation of all the rules, putting everything together in a way that was more comprehensible. So it's obviously the best one because it had the most research done on it.
I'll say this though, because I know nothing about this. These old gentlemen are talking about ages bygone that I don't really know.
Oh, sure, right.
Relate to. But I got into Dungeons and Dragons when I was in my early 20s, I think, or like.
Oh, really? Okay.
Late teens, early 20s. Through a friend, like black metal nerd, very strange person, who had anything occult. It would live in his bookshelf, and among those things were like the Dungeons and Dragons books, and they were like interesting, and we would sit around and look at them. And then he started a game for us. But when I started playing it then, which speaks to why I liked the second edition, is that it felt like there was this endless library of information if you needed to add something to the story and you needed kind of lore or a mechanic or a system. He had like piles and piles of Dragon magazines. He had like a bazillion books and supplements and guides, and we could sort of cherry pick as we kind of built this dynamic story what we needed from that. And that I thought felt like, wow, there's just so much written about this that even if you don't like half of it, you still have an endless amount kind of. And that's what I felt was different from, I heard about game and game systems and things, and I'd leaf through. I even worked in a video game shop that had some role playing stuff, and I'd leaf through the books, and it all seemed very limited and kind of a set of rules. But here was advanced Dungeons and Dragons with like just a trove of text and information. I felt that was kind of magical about it.
Yeah, and for sure. And it's like one of the great things about it is there's two things I think that are really important about that, is that one, everything is optional. So you can pick and choose what you want to use for your campaign. And
so wait, THAC0's optional?
Well, not THAC0. Gretchen
you don't have to attack.
You're right.
The exception to prove the rule, Gretchen. Well done.
But all of the extra rules are optional. And then secondly, all of the rules are consistent to the base classes in the player's handbook. Compare that to later editions of the books, which actually change mechanics of characters. So like if you think about, for example, like third edition and Pathfinder 3.5, they would add like almost new mechanics. Like the character operates differently after they have this new mechanic. For the 99% of the material that came out for second edition that was like an add-on, it fit seamlessly into the standard character classes. You didn't need to learn a new rule set or read. You didn't have to read the entire book. You could just read the kit that you wanted to play from one of the Splat books, for example, or just read the new spells from Spells and Magic, for example. You didn't need to take everything.
Yeah, and that's the point. You don't need everything. The accessibility through bolt-on systems, and even if you didn't have a rule and you had a decent set of players in a GM, you'd make a bolt-on system to function for that oddity that's occurring in your RPG.
But it's funny. It's funny because it's like, Lego Technics. I don't know if you have that overseas, but there's like Lego and then there's Lego Technics. It's like plastic mechano. You get like cogs and wheels and pneumatics. I don't know. You can kind of engineer your little car. And I felt like when we would like, oh, this is cool. I saw this in Dragon 187. They had this fun little, I don't know, mechanic for like wounds or for critical hit systems or whatever. You can just add it. There wasn't like, you didn't have to change anything about the rest of the game. It just fit in like a neat little another cog in the machine, so to speak.
Yeah, I love that. And, you know, you bring up another great point, Andre, and I think that you kind of also hit on it with what you initially said, and that's that there is just an enormous amount of material for second edition for any flavor you could possibly imagine, from ancient prehistory up to super sci-fi, spaceships and castles and underwater adventures and you know, low magic settings.
That's the beauty. The campaign worlds and the troves of worlds that are available in so many different settings throughout second edition Dungeons and Dragons. Everything from the ones we all know, like Ravenloft, Al-Qadim, all those things all the way through, and then up into the stuff that you can create yourself, and the individual game worlds like Grey Orc, Forgotten Realms. It's just all there, isn't it? And you can just pick and choose. Sorry to interrupt you.
But if you're using this as like a plus to second edition, wouldn't later editions also have this treasure trove? Like, doesn't 5 have this treasure trove?
I think it has lore-wise, but they had to. Well, there's the copyright thing that made them kind of start from scratch. I think somehow, I don't know how that works out, but they kind of had to start from scratch, new owners and things, and then they have a different mechanic, so all the players submitted content is kind of null and void as far as mechanics go, at least. And you know, they've tried to soften the rules up so it's more generalized. I mean, all the different classes basically have like a free attack each round with the same hit probability through the various like cantrips or whatnot. So they turn it into a very different game mechanically, and that does not fit very well with all the second edition stuff, at least as far as I know.
Yeah, I think that's I think, Andre, you bring up a really good point, and I think to kind of address what you're saying, Gretchen, is that although third edition and on are still called Dungeons and Dragons, and they have a lot of familiar terms and things like that, they are essentially different games. After second edition, the way the game is played, it changed pretty dynamically. They really did change it pretty dynamically from a class-based system into a skill-based system.
Yeah.
And you know, you compare something like 5th edition and kind of every character is a precious snowflake, to second edition where you probably ought to have a backup ready because any moment you could really die. I mean,
oh man, if Tick Tick dies, Rob, it's going to be a very quiet night.
Yeah, save or die. I mean, like those things, you know, and we're not talking 3 death saves. We're talking you're dead.
Yeah, one roll of the die and you're dead.
But that's another beauty of Dungeons and Dragons, is that the original conceptology was no permanent wounding. Magic is fantastic. No, nothing can ever wound you forever. You can always be returned to life. Magic's so fantastical. Down the line, there'll be other characters and stuff that can resurrect characters, bring them back. And so the worry was always not to worry about the death of your character, because there's always another one available, or it could always come back at some point. But as we saw, like, depth and change, not that, I mean, this is to appreciate as well, to say that we don't disappreciate other games that aren't heavily mechanical. You know, we do appreciate other games as well, but that just this was something we saw in Dungeons and Dragons second edition that was priceless to us. And the expansion from first into second, also across classes, there was significant change where the priest opened up. The priest became a whole new magical dimension where it became unrestricted from a base list of 20 spells to only casting spells based on what his religion or his mythos or his things might feel. It was just such a good evolution. It started off a bit squeaky clean, but then as it progressed and learned more and players contributed more to the game, it went back to its gritty first edition origins. So I think
And that's a good point also. I think second edition has this, I don't know, fifth edition probably has it too, but in some sense. But but when they included this immense pantheon of gods into the world, and then later Planescape expanded on that, everything was kind of interconnected in a way, like Chris says, like even if you did die, you always had the option to continue your campaign in some weird manner. And I think fifth edition has they have taken a little bit of that with them now that they I know they have this Descent into Avernus module that they published recently, and they clearly want to keep some of that aspect where you kind of, I mean, magic comes from somewhere, and the gods live somewhere, and everything is somewhere. Like it makes the world super three-dimensional, and suddenly like the prayer isn't just like something you say, but it has like I don't know, it has like an envelope and an address and a stamp on it, and it goes somewhere, and somebody brings it there, you know.
I guess that is something beautiful about the game, in the sense that it does offer to the players, even back then, the true thought that there is afterlife, that everybody is getting an afterlife, no matter who you are, and all the afterlives are on the planescape, and they're all perfectly associated to what alignment you are, which brings you on to an alignment discussion. But that some people would like to go to these places that other people want, and these planes are infinite, and you get your own little space to do what you want. So it's like death is not the end, yeah, as you say.
Yeah. For me as an atheist, like originally at least an atheist, growing up an atheist, that was kind of, that helped me kind of understand and sort of implement into my game religion and belief systems and gods in a way that I can understand. Because I knew about Norse mythology, you know, that was very down-to-earth stuff. Everybody knew the gods by their first name and where they lived, sort of thing, and they were quite human in their behavior,
right?
And then I like that the pantheon basically the pantheon in Dungeons and Dragons is our Western and also to some extent other pantheons. You know, they kind of put it in there, but well, I thought that was very cool.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of gets to that issue of like the just the amount of lore that the second edition setting has in it. I mean, I know that, let's just talk about the Splat books, which would sort of fall under a number of different books, but you know, the complete handbooks. So there's for those who aren't aware, there's a whole collection of like the complete Thief's Handbook and the complete Fighter's Handbook and the complete Paladin's Handbook, and then they got into the racial handbooks, like the complete Gnomes and Halflings and the complete Elves, and then they had a few that were setting specific, like the complete Gladiator's Handbook. And then they had all these historical supplements, like ones about Rome and Greece and all of that. And then, yeah, they're so good. And then they also, of course, had the Faiths and Avatars and the Powers and Pantheons books for Forgotten Realms setting. And I remember I could flip through those books, and my imagination would just be getting going, not even about what the characters were offered mechanically, but just like each one would have a little story from the character's perspective, and then they would have what they were, and you kind of felt like, ooh, I could be a part of this little special secret society or part of this group, and
yeah,
all
that exists now.
So from 6 original classes or whatever, or 7 original classes. So therein you get people go, but there's only 6 classes or 7 classes. But each one is a myriad of sub kits that give it its own pure strength of identity, role playing purpose, and that's where you're getting into your role play, isn't it? You know, where you want to angle your character into, where its motivations are, where it's going from to, what it's done, how it can react. And to your argument that I've heard the good Robert say before, why would my character do it rather than not do it? And that lends you that role play opportunity as well within your kit.
Yeah,
I feel so. The Splat books are a win. Definitely.
Oh, they're so great.
I mean, again, even all the books had this little system of. I mean, because it's super crunchy. I mean, you could read the same rules, I don't know, 3 times per session, and you still wouldn't remember them kind of quite, but
especially spells.
Are you describing me?
No, I mean, that's not the strength of the system, or at least for me, it's not like, oh my god, I love crunchiness, but I thought that, you know, there was just this I don't know how to describe it in words. It's like the fjords of Norway have this fractal design. They repeat on the grand and the small scale, and I felt like you could zoom in forever into the second edition books, and there would be like little blurbs describing there would be like a bunch of rules, and then there would be a little blurb describing how Cassandra the thief was in some kind of setting and doing something, and some writers had written this little, I don't know, this maybe very, very short piece of text, but it would kind of explain a situation. And they had a lot of that, I think, in the books. And even some books were written in in the first person voice of Elminister, the mage wizard.
Yeah.
And other books were written in the, what was that, Volo's guide?
Volo Thamkin Arm. There's those, and in fact, there is a 5th edition book, Volo's Guide to Monsters. But they had that whole series of those Volo's books, and they're fantastic. You don't even they're system agnostic almost too. I mean, you can, they have like descriptions of towns and people, and it's all flavor.
And it's kind of bird's eye view, but I mean, it just kicks off the imagination a lot. And then you can see that it's supported by these rules that if your imagination doesn't completely encompass or doesn't stretch far enough, and you wonder how to incorporate, you can kind of lean on the rules a little bit. And then, I mean, as you get better, or air quotes better, I mean, as you get more familiar, then you don't need the rules as much. But to begin with, they for sure were in help, I think.
If you're stuck as a GM, as a place to go or a player to interpret. But yeah, definitely.
I mean, I think once you start going down the 2E rabbit hole, and I don't know if I speak for Gretchen, but I'm pretty sure I speak for both Andre and Chris here. There's an endless supply of things that I would love to do. And I've known this game for a long time. And I will never get through all of the awesome things that I want to do with this game, with 2nd edition, because it's so vast. That's the thing. And, for people out there who are like, well, that's why I don't want to play it, because like, how do you even get into it? But that's the point. You can start off so simply.
It's not a niche. It's not a niche. It's definitely not a niche.
I mean, you can pick up the most.
It's clinging on in there so it can and grow again. So,
well, and even pick up the most basic class, and then I mean, as you get kind of inspired, there's just like, go ahead. You want to do that? Sure, we can do that. That fits in here nicely. Like, it's hard. It's hard to come up with something weird enough that it isn't supported by the rules, I think.
So let's talk about that, though, because one of the things I think is also a strength of 2nd edition is its limitations. Because although 2nd edition has the vast options, but once you choose an option, there is plenty of opportunity to grow in a role-playing context and through things that you gain and stuff like that. But essentially, you're not jumping all over between all these different classes. You're not learning all of these divergent skills. It's much more specialized. So each character becomes more, I think, in its way, the classes are more unique from each other. They're more different from each other. Yeah. Like, you don't have a bard that can heal. You don't have, a wizard. Well, I mean, I guess later in the power, skills and options books, and we can talk about those. Those players' options books are a little bit controversial, but you don't have the wizard who's, for the most part, like wielding swords and on the front lines. There's sort of, each character has its own little niche.
Everything is in its own place. Everything knows its place and is in the right place, if balanced. And therein lieth the limitations sometimes, because if you are void of a class, you can feel the pain. That is a fair critique, definitely.
I feel like, I don't know about balance, but I feel like, somebody sat down with a certain love for the class that they were about to kind of write up as a part of the system. I feel like everybody that sat down and wrote about a class had a certain love for it, and there's there's a non-linearity to second edition and a non-balance in a way that makes each class, once you've decided, or class or subclass or kit or whatever, once you've decided on your character, you have an arc built into the system, sort of. There's like, well, if you take like a typical mage wizard, it's hard to survive the first levels. And you require a fuck ton of XP. Oops. And sorry. and well, it's super hard. And then suddenly you get into the mid levels and you're vastly powerful. And then and you hear the thief and the warrior complain that you can kind of annihilate a town of orcs by a flick of a thumb. But you feel so if you get to that point, you feel like, well, I put in the work, I've struggled, and now I get what's earned. And that's built into those kind of, like you say, set classes that you can't change. But if you put in the sweat and the elbow grease, you kind of get a reward in the end. And there's like an arc there. You don't have to make up your own character arc. It's kind of built in.
Yeah, the beauty of named leveling up as part of your structure, and this is something else which is a limitation. Yeah, leveling therefore brings watershed results, doesn't it? You hit that point, poof, you improve significantly. Whereas in other games we see gentle development in skills, don't we? Like they might see a skill go up a few percent or something. And in Dungeons and Dragons, it's very fixed. Your stats rarely moved. Your tributes rarely moved. Your strength or stuff, all your stats rarely went up or down. Yet the leveling concept was quite strong with an identity being you reach a certain level and you're like a named level, not like a knock, and then you don't improve much beyond that, but it's incremental, like gently, it had that strength about it that even if I'm 9th level, which is the name level, the point that we don't recognise you gain all your lordly abilities, all your special stuff. If you're a priest, you get worshippers in a temple to help your god. If you're a wizard, you get little mages come to learn off you. If you're a paladin, you go off and do all the Superman stuff. And then you say, oh, well, wait, but that's happening then at 15th, 16th and 17th. Well, they're better, but they're not that unapproachably better. They're still reachable, if you know what I mean. It's still like you reach a plateau, but then it's still ascendable into the next plateau to adventure in.
Oh yeah, I don't think that I don't know. I've heard the word plateau or like flattening out of a curve in terms of people discussing video games. Like when you get into some levels, it gets boring. And also another thing that people talk about in video games is what do the numbers mean? Like who cares if you improve 1.3% in sneak? Like 1.3%, what does that even do in a video game? You would wonder. And in second edition, you don't have that. Like you say, I mean, you notice a huge change. Like you gain 40,000 XP and you as a wizard, and you level up to new level, and you get like new superpowers. And I guess for a fighter, less so. But I mean, still the numbers are. You notice the change a lot, I think. And also, I don't think it flattens out at any level. Debatably, the rogue has a problem in second edition. The run of the mill, like straight out the player's handbook rogue in higher levels has kind of a survivability problem. But we could discuss that. But I think apart from that, I feel like it's I like the non-linearity of it and the feeling of incremental boosts along the way.
Well, I would even argue, too, that the game is organized in a way, second edition is organized in a way that at higher levels, like as Chris mentioned, name level, that there is an implication in the rules and in the way that they're described that the game will change. That's the point at which you start attracting followers and build a stronghold. And even published adventures have sort of a global kind of a much larger reach. Like there's an implication that what you're doing is of much greater consequence and scale. And so I think that the rules kind of make that. I mean, I think that they go hand in hand with that. I think that's kind of a part of it. And
you see the origins of Game of Thrones in Dungeons and Dragons second edition named.
For sure. Yeah, definitely.
I mean, we used to play as kind of a life substitute, sandboxy style. Like we would just start at level 1, and our DM would just come up, make up new stuff, and the world would expand around us. And that sort of play is not super well supported by, because we would want to adventure even at level 16, but the system is kind of built around a level 16 wizard is basically kind of the king wizard of the world if you want to follow the core books, but then you kind of have to expand on it, and suddenly now the world has X amount of level 16 wizards that can flatten mountains by a flick of the fingers. It doesn't really vibe well. You kind of have to make up a different world if you want to do it good.
But it's to recognise as well the difference between like what is power play and what is a character and what is depth of character over time. It's like if I was to give you a 16th level wizard straight off the bat, I think you'd struggle to play it.
Oh yeah,
I think you'd struggle to pick all his spells, explain why he learned them, where he learned them from, why he learned them, what his applications of the spells are, why a 16th level fighter. I mean, yeah, we could do it as advanced role players, but the growth into that point gives you all that past history, like a massive pyramid just coming up to a point. With the ascent being named and beyond, like changing the world, doing really mystical, high fantasy, crazy stuff. Is where I went, or where my feelings are with it. But I've seen the strength in as well adaptation to like stuff like Dragonlance, and that was really good. Like they created its own entire. I mean, you've played that, haven't you, Gretchen? Dragonlance through in Rob's campaign.
Yeah.
What's your interpretation of your experiences of Dungeons and Dragons around that? Because that's like first, just creeping into second, or do you play it as second, Rob? Gretchen.
I mean, I really like Dragonlance, but there are some things that kind of drive me a little bonkers. But I think it's hard to talk about second edition Dragonlance, the one that I play in, which is Rob's, because he does a lot of homebrew. And I think he kind of takes a lot of liberties, which isn't, I think if I were to take my experience with second edition, knowing Rob's game, and take it to a different table with a different DM, I think I would be really confused. So it's hard for me to kind of give perspective on second edition because of that. Maybe I'm wrong, but I feel like Rob just creates these worlds and reads into rules a little differently. And I don't know, it follows a system, but it's very custom tailored to Rob's style.
Well, there's flexibility. I think that's what everybody does with second edition.
Second
edition is very well.
Each GM will have a
table to table.
If GMs meet, they go, but do you use that rule? How do you homebrew that? What do you do when your characters hit this point of no hit point? So I understand what you're saying, Gretchen, because you could come to my game and go, no, it's not happened to my game. Yeah. I'm an officious GM, which is the first thing Gary Guy gets said at the table with all the young players. Don't have an officious tit of a GM, like who thinks he's running everything. You're coming together and playing. You need a set of rules, and you're playing good for the goose, good for the gander. But what one crew is playing might be very different to the next. So you might see like strengths in different things, or I think that's valid.
You bring up a really interesting point, Chris, because that's actually what second edition tried to do, because first edition was just basically a combination of like tons of homebrew rules people had kind of come up with. And when they developed second edition, they asked for input from the community, like what rules are you using? And they tried to kind of codify all of these very different tables that everybody was playing at. But you're right. I mean, Chris, you and I think philosophically we're on the same page, but we do play the game a little different. Like our tables, our game style, our rules, the way we interpret things is a little different. But I think that's the magic of second edition. That's like what's so good about it, you know?
Yeah, but how come you can't take that to other editions?
I'm sure you could. I'm sure you could.
Okay. So then I think it's the magic of the gaming system?
I don't know, but I think it's like if you would try, and I met one person who did, if you would try to like internalize all of the second edition rules and kind of crunch them out as a DM, it would be insane. You couldn't play it. And then so there was always like the DM needed to be like a curator of rules and lore. And then you would have such things as good and bad DMs based on their managing their interpretations and doing the story. Like it would be, I don't know that I've seen that in 5th edition DMs. They seem to play the same, like the system works the same every table I see, except maybe those crazy people who do the C team, but they don't use rules at all, basically. But
you should see the mainstay of the core section of rules intact, and I bet Rob has got the intact main section of the rules.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, core books for sure. Yeah.
So therefore, he's within realm. And the first thing it says in Dungeons and Dragons is, if you do not like a rule, if you didn't like a rule or you do not feel this rule suits your gaming table, discuss and change it.
Yeah.
But once you assign it and kind of like it's in play for that thing, then it should it's to give everybody so they don't know when something comes up that's an exception, the GM must rule, mustn't he?
You know, it's interesting because we had 2 players in the Dragonlance game that I run, and they're no longer in the game. And there was conflict, in particular with one of those players. And those 2 players, they took it for granted that certain rules were what they thought they were. They had interpretations of the rules because they had been playing so long, and it's so distant from when that game was like actually out and new, that their rules had become so ingrained in how they played that they just assumed that that was actually how the game was played. So when they came to the table, there was some conflict because my style and their style was different. Not that either one was better or worse. It's just that that's how we had always played, you know, like that was the way the game was. And so there was conflict there. So I think that that's kind of an interesting.
I remember that from being younger. And playing the game that we would have like one style of play with my GM, and then encountering others. I mean, as when I was young, anything that was different from what I thought or felt was wrong, you know, because it's a part of being young. But then as an older person, I understand that, you know, it's all about making a game work. But I think it's kind of an immature way of coming at a role-playing game to say that you know how it's supposed to work. Feels a bit immature to me.
Yeah, I agree as well. I mean, I think to a certain extent, like for new players, I get it. I get that, you know, and I think one of the things, you know, Andre, you mentioned about I don't want to get off too much on 5th edition, but, you know, you mentioned the similarity in tables. I mean, that could be partially because of the success of something like Critical Role, where people are learning how to play the game from a single source. Whereas in earlier editions, and this is like, you know, pre-internet and stuff, we learned by the person who taught us how to play. Yeah, and most of us didn't learn the game because by reading the book, we learned the game by playing the game. Yeah. And so even now, like I still will, like I'll read something and I'll be like, oh, I had that rule in my head totally wrong. And I mean, how many years have I been playing this game? And I still will do that.
I had a player drowned the other day and was like, oh, what rules on drowning? Because it was just so expected. No, it's just not an unexpected incident that, in Dungeons & Dragons, didn't expect the encounter where they're drowning, gem error, and interpreted a rule indirectly. And the player was like, well, why don't you know the rule? And I'm like, oh, shit, yeah, because there's so many rules. And then found the rule and then interpreted it and corrected the issue. But yeah, you do. Some players expect to come to a table with it really, really clear, don't they? But they don't understand sometimes the depth of the level of the exceptions of the rules.
I think the role of those rules in second edition, for me at least, how they make sense is that they add options for creativity, because you wonder, okay, I'm drowning, how to deal with that? And if you don't want to be kind of left to the devices of the DM, basically deciding if you live or die, then you can say, okay, these are the mechanics of drowning, let's implement them. And then you can see if there are ways you can think of to stop yourself from drowning based on these mechanics. And that that's how they are fun if they're implemented that way. That you can kind of interact with the rules in an interesting way and come up with novel solutions. I think that's fun then.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because there is a certain vagueness in a lot of second edition rules, and I think it's intentional, especially when you consider spells, where there are things that it doesn't really give you enough information that you can definitively say it's this way or it's this way. It leaves up a little bit of interpretation, and I think that it kind of is considering, my opinion is that it's intentional, and it's considering each table is going to be different, and that there is going to be a certain level of trust between the players and the game master, that there can be like a little bit of a discussion, or I wouldn't say an argument, but like a case made that I can use the spell this way, or I can survive drowning in this way. And like that's, and if you're at a good table, then it works really well. I think in your game, Chris, it works really well. I think what Gretchen is interpreting by the Dragonlance game that's what she's interpreting, is that I do that a lot. There's a lot of they're not really super concrete in a lot of ways, and so like you have to make this interpretation, and the best way it's done is where everybody's kind of working together to figure out what that interpretation is, and I think that's one of second edition's greatest strengths, actually.
Can somebody enlighten me on something else as well, please? I happen to admit a bit of a faux pas, but having only briefly encountered fifth for a few games with the Dungeon Master Online, I cannot be too sure, but did they keep the entire concept of alignments, or did they just go back to law, or did they go good, neutral, evil, or did they include chaos elements with them? Or?
It exists.
I think there are alignments, but they do not seem, I don't know, they don't seem to encourage very strict rules around alignments, and I think it's kind of about the day and age we live in, because if you want to be a little bit crass, second edition alignments are written from like the standpoint of a what's it called, WASP from the United States. It's like Anglo-Saxons from the United States out view on life and the world. So good is interpreted that way. The evil is interpreted the same through that lens. So I mean, I don't think that they wanted to keep that in 5th edition, and I can't blame them really for kind of playing it down a little bit, because it's I think 5th edition is good in many ways, and I think one of the ways it's good is just trying to rethink that whole axis of evil and good.
Yes, a little bit. That's an interesting crossover back into 5th with the more less 70s mindset and 80s mindset into this renaissance of thought of modern age of but then you start asking questions like, are bugbears evil really? And we'd not even considered that back in the day, because of course we were just playing a game. But now we do reach a point where, is it fair to say orcs are the enemy, etc., or whatever? But then you reach tropic levels of panic. Like, what can you actually then heroically fight in the sense of a Conan-tropic thing? You always need some sense of evil or villain or larger foe or a greater thing to overcome in Dungeons and Dragons, and alignment provides that. That
is something very D&D about every now and then you're the hero, you go and you fight the villain is clear, and you beat that thing to bits until it's dead, and then you steal all of its stuff.
Yeah, and you know cut out the interesting bits.
But Origins, but that's not what it is now. That's not with thinking players and stuff. But it still isn't too far indiscriminate from the sense of there's a big thing to achieve, and it has this big result, and then it has this big reward. That can be a bit tropic to Dungeons and Dragons, but
it's very materialistic, also, isn't it? Like if you want to go at it at this level. I mean, I was playing it with a dungeon master was very contrarian and like into black metal, and I mean his sense of good and evil was well and truly baked into the system we were playing, but that wasn't entirely based on the books, but more about his interpretation, I think. But so he would play the lawful good guys. I mean, equally horrible and punishing as the lawful evil guys. So I mean, it's open for interpretation, but I think, like you say, it's written in the 70s, so there's a lot of that in the books.
Yeah, I mean, like a good example, like of where you might see that crossover, but interpreted differently is like, for instance, I had a friend whose campaign was quite extensive, and he eventually reached Named and Beyond, and he was a priest, and he was lawful evil, and he was a half orc, and his whole intent was to return to his tribe, stop them being chaotic and wandering around and smacking things, and form them into a lawful area on a bit of land and hold the land. And he waited politically until there was a situation in Steech with the giants and everything, and Steech gets attacked by the giants, and land opens up. And he moved orcs politically, like went to an orc tribes and conquered that leader and usurped his position, moved them to this location, set them up, and then did the giants campaign off the back of that. But the whole principle of being, I might be lawful evil, but I fucking want my people to be safe. I want my people to have a land. So it was, what is that interpretation? I've known a lawful good paladin say, "I'll hang the kobold." What? And I've gone, no, that's like your alignment's in jeopardy. And he's gone, no, he's murdered up that family of farmers. He's thoroughly evil. The law says he has to hang. And I'm like, no, you're misinterpreting. That's not good. He said, well, what option is there to redemption? He's spitting at me all the while. He just wants to kill things. He'll go on to his afterlife, and literally hung him. And that leaves the GM in this area where you're talking about, Andre, but has had some of the most extra unbelievable role-play moments in a game that was supposed to be just
for sure.
Roll of that. But I think one of the things that's interesting about second edition, though, in general, in particular, about all of these things, like whether you're talking about alignment, class, backgrounds, evil races, whatever it might be, is that it scaled from a 12-year period. So there was a longer extended period of the game, and virtually every potential outcome exists within the lore at one place or another. So like there isn't even like the Book of Humanoids. The Book of Humanoids exists, the complete Book of Humanoids exists, which is a splat book where you play monsters. And it offers the opportunity where if you want, you can have the good ogre, you can have the good orc, you can have the good kobold. And also the interpretation of what alignment means can be anything you choose at your table, like Andre's talking about in his black metal DM, who completely reinterpreted the way that alignment was done. That is acceptable within the confines of second edition. What we're talking about really is philosophy, not really, and that's just general philosophy, not second edition philosophy, which in my mind really allows for a lot of flexibility. Yes. I think we get kind of caught up in the arguments over like, oh, alignment's good or alignment's bad, or we shouldn't do this or we should do this, when really all possibilities were out there before. Yeah. If you think otherwise, then you're not really understanding second edition.
It's not a rigid caning tool for the GM to smack on the players. It's not a hard and fast conquering thing that conquers how players must play the game. It's a guide. Good people do evil things in the name of good. Sometimes evil people do good things. Sometimes evil people do love stuff. You know what I mean? So it's totally interpretable and totally, as you say, indeed open to that interpretation and Andre's. So I thought it was just something that came to the game that also led systemically to actions within the game because of alignment. Like certain spells only work on certain alignments. Only certain things affect certain ways that your character is. You can only tune into that thing if he's that alignment, or cannot, or if he's not, or he doesn't understand it.
I think you're right, both of you, in that it's not rigid, but I mean there's some strange things built into the system that are like the philosophy that's baked into it. It's invisible and not mentioned, but it's there. Like all necromancies, if you do any necromancy spell, you're immediately evil as a character, which makes only sense if you feel that raising corpses is evil. I mean, debatably it is, but I mean, Santeria religions, African religions deal with zombies and like the dead and sacrifices of hens, and they're I mean, they're not evil, everybody in Cuba, because of the Santeria practices. It's a very westernized
I think
thing that's built into the base of the game. I mean, you kind of have to. I mean, if you're blind to it, then it turns into a kind of black and white system, I think. But you kind of have to be aware enough to kind of pierce that and think about it a little bit and maybe treat it a little differently.
Good point. Well, look, guys, we got to round off because we've been talking for a long time, and I want to spare our listeners from
you gotta edit this
2-hour podcast. But this is really great point. I think the clear outcome here is that second edition is the best.
Yes,
that's all there is to it.
Yeah, you could just edit out all the rest and go, second edition is the best.
Well, it's interesting. Thanks, guys. I really appreciate you coming on and talking about it, because I think that as you know, the three of us play together and we love playing second edition. And I think especially Chris and I, we're often fighting against some stereotypes for second edition. Endre, I know you stay free of it, but Chris and I are always, I feel like people pick at the scab of Chris and I's feelings about second edition. There's sort of underhanded comments about it.
It helps not to interact with people. That's what I do. I just don't speak to people. Yeah.
And as I said, it's not to say that as gamers, I mean, we are as such not grey gamers, but you know, we have been in it a long time. But it's not to say that we don't appreciate the renaissance and the growth of the hobby and the strength of the community. We love the fact that there's new things. We love the fact that there's other games with no dice and no dungeon masters. We love these things, and we will play them.
For sure. And that's a good point. And I just want to say, as a sign,
everything has its place.
It's when I was playing in Oslo, when 25 years ago with my black metal friends, I knew exactly 8 people in Norway that played Dungeons and Dragons, and I didn't think there could be much more of us because it was such a strange and occult hobby. So I mean, look at us now. It's vastly different. And me going on about second edition to some extent can probably be blamed on the fact that that's where I started, but let's not fall for that trap here at the end.
For sure.
Yeah, I'm happy even if just somebody picks up Dungeons and Dragons, plays it, goes, okay, that wasn't how I interpreted it, but then goes on and plays something else. Or even if somebody else goes and is playing these other games and goes, hang on a minute, Dungeons and Dragons, that might actually be okay. It might be worth a look. Oh, this second edition, that's equally powerful. Just play and enjoy.
Edition Wars
3.5 and Pathfinder.
Edition Wars 3.5 and Pathfinder, we're combining them together. But before we do that, we've got Amanda Plageman on the show. And of course, Amanda is sort of the third member of our podcast team here. So we're not going to talk about 4th edition for real. Although I think Amanda has played a bit and I have read a little bit. So we're going to spend a couple of minutes talking about 4th edition before we get into 3.5 and Pathfinder. And right before we went on the recording, Amanda, you said that there were 2.5 things that are good about 4th edition. What are those 2.5 things?
Okay, it's no secret that I'm not a fan of 4th ed.
Controversy.
Anyway, first and foremost, it was the first game to fix the 5-minute workday. Go them. Typically, most D&D editions, when the wizard, or to a lesser extent the cleric, run out of spells, the action is over and you rest.
Yeah, true.
4th ed fixed that with encounter powers and daily powers and at-will powers, that sort of thing. There is no 5-minute workday anymore. Pathfinder took a cue from it and brought in endless infinite cantrips and orisons to give spellcasters at least a little bit of magic that they have access to all the time. But that came after 4th ed. 4th ed was the one that pioneered allowing casters to not have the action stop when their magic runs out. Go them.
Yeah, okay, so I had never heard that term 5-minute workday, but sort of context clues are telling me what you mean is that situation where you go into an encounter, the wizard or priest casts all of their spells, and then so like the group has adventured for 5 minutes, and the battle is over, and then but they're out of spells, so the group doesn't want to continue on adventuring because they don't want their spellcasters to be traveling along with them without any healing spells or fireballs or whatever it might be.
Go ahead. Think back to our second ed game. My wizard started out with 1 spell per day.
Yeah, right.
And I either had to save it for when something worse was going to happen, waste it on armor and effectively be, useless all day, or just fire it off early and hope for the best.
And then run in with your 4 hit points and your staff.
Exactly.
Or perhaps a dagger. Although technically speaking, I believe that we don't play this rule. I've kind of house ruled it out. But in Dragonlance, I believe that wizards are only allowed to use a knife because it's inspired from first edition. And I believe a knife does D3 damage.
Oh my God, that is so sad.
It's awful. Yeah, so good on 4E for fixing that.
Okay, so what are the other 1.5 things?
They broke out magic away from just arcane and divine. They gave us primal, and then later on psychic or psionic. So now, typically in most editions of D&D, druids and rangers have divine magic the same way that clerics and paladins do. 4E was the first one to say, no, druids and rangers have nothing to do with the same magical sources that clerics and paladins do. They shouldn't be running off the same power source. Cool. Awesome.
That makes sense.
Yeah. And then the last was a thing that I love in theory, though I sometimes disagree with how they put it into practice. They gave us ritual magic. And this is basically utility spells that you typically don't need to have memorized on a regular basis, but when you need them, you really, really need them. Things like knock or pretty much any of the non-combat stuff other than identifications, that sort of thing. Or Tensor's floating disk, things like that. And this, you have a separate book. You have a spell book and a ritual book. And your spell book is what you memorize from and you cast from. But your ritual book is basically a cookbook. You don't memorize from it. It's a recipe book. And when you need to cast a ritual spell, they usually take about 10 minutes or so, sometimes even longer. And they just work. They don't count against your spells per day. But they also aren't something that you can just pull out on the fly. So the stuff that nobody ever memorizes because you're only going to use it maybe one session in 5s and you don't want to waste a spell slot for it. Make it ritual magic. Make it so that you pull out the cookbook, read the recipe, take your extended length of time to do it, and move on.
Right.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I don't always agree with which spells they made rituals and which spells they left as spells, but the idea is amazing.
Hence the half. I think that the main problem, though, that and I don't want to spend too much time on 4th edition, but I think as somebody who's read some 4th edition and kind of like looked over it, the main issue with 4th edition, it's not that it's a bad game. It's actually a good game.
Not. It is.
It's just not Dungeons and Dragons.
Exactly.
And I think that there's a feel about Dungeons and Dragons that even when you're talking about the vast difference between like 1E, 2E, and then going into 3.5, 3.5 and Pathfinder, which did a pretty dramatic turn as far as how things were different. They both still feel like Dungeons and Dragons.
Exactly.
And so does 5th edition. But 4th edition just doesn't feel like Dungeons and Dragons. It feels like well, you've described it as a it's
MMO the RPG.
Yeah, MMO the RPG. And so it's not a bad game. So I don't want to say that we're not including it because I just don't think it's not playing the same sport. So they're not really there's no edition war because they're not even on the battlefield.
Exactly.
They're on
one other tiny thing. The levels on it go from 1 to 30. So there's no argument as to what's considered low level, mid-level, or high level play. Levels 1 through 10, low level. 10 through 20, mid. 20 through 30, high. Cool.
Okay.
It's a small thing, but it's nice.
Interesting. Well, look, let's move on to the real reason that you are on the show this week, and that is to talk about 3.5 or Pathfinder, because I believe that through some sort of heretical remark that I saw you recently post on social media, that you proclaimed that 3.5 is your favorite, and to which I put a black mark next to Melanora Brightgleam in my folder to remember to kill you just before you reach the moment of glory in my game for such blasphemy against the best version, which is second edition. I'm just kidding. 3.5 Pathfinder.
If it helps, 3.75 is my favorite, aka Pathfinder.
Right, and that's what we should call it that now. So, and Pathfinder is not technically Dungeons and Dragons, but it is so interchangeable with 3.5 that in fact I ran a 3.5 game for a while, but it was essentially Pathfinder 3.5. We used, because it was set in the Forgotten Realms, so we used materials which were 3.5, but we defaulted to Pathfinder in a lot of cases, except for when it was something very niche, Forgotten Realms specific. So, for example, you were playing a Hathrin from Rashomon in the Forgotten Realms. So a lot of the lore and all of the mechanics were tied to 3.5 because they don't exist in Pathfinder because it's a intellectual property of Wizards of the Coast. So,
oops. We're doing the same thing with our Ravenloft game. It's mostly Pathfinder, but Ravenloft is a 3.5 D&D property.
So what is it that makes 3.5 the best version of Dungeons & Dragons? Or 3.75, the best version of Dungeons & Dragons?
3.5. Gotta love it. You can't discuss 3.75 without 3.5.
True.
Or for that matter, 3.0. But, well, that was such a small period of time that we might as well ignore it.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that, actually, because that was really interesting as a historical footnote in gaming, because it was strange how 3.5 came out and they're like, oh, this isn't quite right. We're just going to change it all now.
Right.
Talk a little bit about that, because you might know more about that than I do, because I was not gaming at all during that period.
Well, it kind of is a two-pronged issue. And part of it was design and part of it was designer, in that, yes, they did a lot of play testing, but they didn't do quite enough play testing, particularly in the higher levels. They play tested the dog snot out of it in the levels like 1 to 5, but the higher level stuff, not quite so much. And as a result, they needed to make some adjustments. There were some spells that needed to be reworked that once they realized, oh, well, this spell's just fine on its own, but when you combine it with this other higher level spell, you win the game.
It's totally broken, right?
Yeah, just put away the dice and declare I win. And as far as the designer problem, there were egos involved and designers butted heads. And there was one particular designer that felt that he was far more important and intrinsic to the design process than Wizards of the Coast did. And so they took the opportunity of doing 3.5 to not invite that particular designer back.
Who was that? Is that the Monty Cook? Or is that... Yeah, Monty Cook, okay. Yeah. And Monty Cook, of course, has his own games now, and actually does some pretty interesting things.
Yeah, he's a great designer in his own right. He just wasn't a particularly great fit for what was going on at the time. Yeah.
And that was an interesting time anyway, because it was... that was Wizards of the Coast after purchasing TSR and kind of running out the string on second edition, and they wanted to make their own product. In fact, they needed to kind of reestablish themselves. They needed to sell a bunch of players' handbooks and Dungeon Master guides again, because nobody needed that stuff anymore who was playing second edition. So that's a big part of why they make a new edition, especially with the game like Dungeons and Dragons, which basically guarantees millions of sales whenever they release a new edition of the player's handbook, Dungeon Master Guide, and Monster Manual. Those three books will sell millions of copies.
Not to mention the infinite amount of free publicity, since, let's face it, all publicity is good publicity, because there's going to be the inevitable edition war.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about it right now. Yeah, exactly. And you're right. No publicity is bad publicity because it just gets them, and they still, what's interesting now is that, and this is just, we're getting a little bit off topic here, but you can't buy second edition books, for example, anymore, but you can buy legal PDFs on many sites, and Wizards of the Coast still benefits from that. They're still selling those.
Yep.
So they can say, oh, so people are get all up in arms about the cultural changes that they're making in certain things, but they're still selling Oriental Adventures.
Exactly.
And still making money off of it.
Right. Now, of course, the folks that are just completely up in arms about the changes and that sort of thing are also the ones that aren't particularly inclined to support WotC in that, and therefore they're not necessarily going to seek out those legal alternatives. But
true.
Well, the less said about that, the better.
R.I.P. the Trove. Anyway.
Yeah, they claim it's coming back, but I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right, so let's talk about it. So what is, so let's talk about 3.5 and what's so great about it. What do you love about 3.5? And maybe kind of, how did you first get started into it? I mean, obviously you have experience, and we were looking at your copy of the Rules Cyclopedia in your hand, the Beck-Me Rules Cyclopedia, before we even began the podcast, or began the recording, and you obviously play in a second edition game, and the rules really well. You're very familiar with the second edition as well. What kind of got you into 3.5 and sort of playing that game?
Well, my second ed group sort of broke up in college, as such things tend to do. And at the time, that with changing life opportunities left me without a gaming group for a period of maybe 4 or 5 years, where if I was gaming at all, it was World of Darkness or something similar. I was temporarily out of D&D. And then when I was able to find a new group, they were playing 3.5. And I didn't know anything about 3.5, but I knew this particular group of people. They were friends from other situations, so I really wanted to play with them, and come on, it's D&D. So I got me a copy of the core book and sat down, and I was being a friend of mine's ride to and from work, so I ended up just hanging out in the parking lot, having nothing better to do, read it from cover to cover, said, this seems pretty neat, and the rest is history.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it feels enough like D&D too. It's like, and I'll, obviously I'm unabashed in my love for second edition, but we play in the 3.5 Pathfinder Ravenloft game with you, and it's D&D. It's still D&D. It's not like it's different. So if you get kind of into it, but what kind of for you, other than just convenience, you're playing with friends, we're talking about this being your favorite version, and now you've certainly had an opportunity to play all of these. So how did it transition from I'm going to play with my friends, I read it cover to cover, this sounds pretty neat, to this is my favorite version of the game?
The customization. That's really all there is to it. What 3.5 and Pathfinder offer is the ability to make just about anything. It has a skill list instead of a set of proficiencies. You get to improve on those skills, either making skills that you have better or getting new skills every single level, as opposed to every 3 or 4 or 6 levels in second ed. And with that, you can sort of move beyond the class system to a degree that, I might be a sword and board, big thuddy fighter, but if I choose to put points into structural engineering, then I can be eventually as good at knowing about that as somebody who's been a wizard or a rogue or whatever else that you would expect them to know those things. So the characters, to my mind, they come out more like well-rounded people. It doesn't matter what edition that you make, you can always make a well-rounded character, certainly, but there's a much better framework to launch that mechanically than there is in the other editions. The feats are nice, but for me, it's really all about the skills.
Yeah, well, and of course, what's interesting about that comment in particular is that in second edition, they introduced non-weapon proficiency. Actually, they technically introduced them in first edition, but that was in a sort of late I forget what book it was that they introduced non-weapon phrase. Like,
was
might
it
be
Unarched
Wilderness
Arcana?
Survival. No,
Yeah, maybe it was Wilderness.
Might have been Wilderness Survival Guide. Anyway, it doesn't. The point is it was like in some offshoot book near the end of the line of AD&D first edition.
Right.
They brought it back for second edition, but they very carefully note that it is an optional rule. Whereas in 3.5, it is a critical component of gameplay.
Yeah, the game just doesn't work without it.
I mean, you know, as we play, and I'm sure others who are out there who have played the game, it's like you're constantly making skill checks. I mean, it's
constantly. Sometimes you're constantly failing them.
Like Gort.
That's on you.
I think the skill checks thing is really interesting too, because you know you're not just like, it doesn't just go up to 20. I mean, if you keep putting points in, it gets crazy high. So it's weird to suddenly be like, I got 36.
By the end of the Compass Knights game, I had been putting in diplomacy and knowledge religion pretty much every time I had the opportunity, and I think I was rocking a plus 45, 48.
Holy crap!
Before I even rolled a die.
But isn't that kind of overkill?
Well, on the one hand, yeah, it's kind of like sandblasting a soup cracker, but then what happens when you run out of soup crackers and all you have is that, you know, metal obelisk that's the only thing between you and success? Sandblast that sucker.
Yeah, I mean, I think to be fair, and you know, as the person who was GMing that game and DMing that game, that, you know, you get to a point where the things you're trying to deduce, it basically means, yeah, sure, like any normal thing you just know, but you're trying to figure out and learn about things that are so obscure and so out there and so distant down the line of the campaign that it's more representative of the fact that you know the inner workings of like the cosmology, which, you know what I mean? Or that you've personally met Baba Yaga. You know what I mean? Like those things happened in that game. And so like the high skill checks, they look absurd on paper or out of context. But I think within the context of the game and having played it, none of it really seems that strange. I actually think it seems more strange to me when people are making skill checks at these absurd amounts at lower levels. Like when, as Gretchen is mentioning here, well, you know, if we're playing the Pathfinder game with you and somebody's like, I got a 37 in this. And I'm like, you're 5th level character. And you're like doing this. That to me almost feels like a level of expertise, which is not equal to where the character's experience.
That is a reasonable point. And the only thing I can really say to justify that is if a character, or for that matter, a player, is utterly obsessive about one or two particular facets of life, they're going to get good at it, even absurdly good at it.
They gonna get good.
Yeah, well, I mean, for that matter, take somebody that's...
it's true, though, in real life.
Yeah, I mean, take somebody who's on the autism spectrum, and they tend to be hyper-focused on very narrow interests. And they can tell you everything about that interest.
Everything.
Well, true enough.
I mean, like, I like Pokemon. But I met somebody that was on the spectrum, and that they also were enthusiastic about Pokemon. And by the end of this conversation, it was clear I know nothing about Pokemon.
Comparatively speaking, right?
I'm not sure I can identify what a Pokemon is by comparison.
That's interesting. So
anyway.
let's kind of talk about the transition from 3.5 to 3.75 or Pathfinder, and sort of what the changes were to you that happened between those two. So I will give you this little snippet here on a personal level. I have never played a true 3.5 game. I, however, was forced. Well, not forced. I was asked to join a 3.5 game.
Oh, we always hear about this.
I was asked to join a 3.5 game, and the dungeon master wanted us to build out our characters in a plan form up to 20th level. It took me 20 hours to do this.
It's a method, yeah.
And I hated it.
Don't blame you.
Because I hate that was even a thing. But what I find interesting, and this is why I bring this up, is not to trash 3.5. It's actually sort of a compliment to Pathfinder. I feel like it feels much less necessary in Pathfinder to do something along those lines to still have an impact on the game. Like, and I'll just take my character, for example, in your game with Gord, who I love. I don't feel like he's falling behind the other characters, in spite of the fact that he's not a skill monkey, but he has this thing.
He's a skill minotaur.
And he gets progressively better at it at a pace that feels equal to the other characters and what they're doing. And so, but I don't know if that would necessarily have been the case if we were playing 3.5 as opposed to Pathfinder. I don't know how you feel about that, or if I'm wrong about that.
I think that you're mostly correct. I think part of the main difference between 3.5 and Pathfinder is that Pathfinder streamlined the skills a good bit. And they also streamlined how they handled skills. That you had class skills and non-class skills in both. But in Pathfinder, the only difference is that you get a +3 bonus on class skills. In 3.5, you could only take up to half of your level in ranks in non-class skills. So if Gort's, level 6 paladin right now, I think?
Fifth. Well, he might be 6th after like last session. I don't know, but
yeah, I gotta do that.
We'll wait to level up until like 3 hours before the game.
Like you do.
Or me, I'll just wait until like 4 months from now.
Somebody does it for you. Yeah. Well, but
you know what?
For example,
look, I just want to clear the air with this. I'm also really bad about leveling up in video games. So it's not just like it's games.
I think what Pathfinder and 3.5 do, and in your game does, that makes it hard for Gretchen, is she has to make choices.
Yes.
And choices make it hard for Gretchen because she's not sure that she's not making the best choice. So when she plays a game like Fallout, which is like a complicated RPG video game, she doesn't want to level up. She doesn't want to make a mistake. She doesn't want to make a mistake on how she puts her points or does her leveling.
Okay, Gretchen, I'm going to impart to you the secret of Pathfinder optimization. There are guides for each and every class, and I will send you the link to where you can download them that will tell you step by step and level by level how to build the most effective possible, in your case, hunter. Period. It'll tell you what feats to take, it'll tell you what spells to select, it'll tell you what skills to max out and which ones to ignore, and you can follow those guides or ignore them as you see fit.
Our mistake was taking a character that has a customizable and upgradable animal companion and
that is
spells. I was like,
you choose one of the hardest classes. Yes.
I was like,
did. I'm like so regretting it now.
I chose Gort. He chops things in half with a holy vengeance, and
does
it's
it
really
very
fun.
well.
He does. He is just brutality in a minotaur.
He's brutality on 2 hooves.
So let's talk about some of the other things that 3.5 and Pathfinder both did really well, and that's that they were well supported. Both of the games came out with a ton of material for players to use to sort of change the game and play in the flavor that they were interested in. Talk a little bit about those things. I'm not as familiar with that stuff as you are. I know some of the Forgotten Realms stuff, but beyond that, I don't really know quite as much. So kind of like talk a little bit about those things and
awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, 3.5 and to an extent Pathfinder, they both came out with the same basic core classes. The standard ones that you see in most forms of D&D: fighter, cleric, bard, barbarian, rogue/thief, druid, monk, wizard, sorcerer. Cool. Okay. You get all that. It's great. Wonderful. But about every 1.5 to 2 years, they'll come out with a new clump. And there are things that you didn't know you needed until you needed it. Like Pathfinder gave us the Oracle. 3.5 gave us something similar in the Divine Champion. It's basically, it does for Divine Magic what Sorcerer does for Arcane Magic. That it's a spontaneous casting class that doesn't have a spell book, that has a small number of spells that they can fire off at will. But honestly, even more than the classes, I liked all of the other races that were available.
Mm-hmm.
The previous editions, you had human, half-elf, elf, dwarf, halfling, sometimes half-orc. That's about it. But
correction. The Complete Book of Humanoids. Complete Book of Humanoids added a couple dozen alternative races, but I will say that, and that was for second edition, the Complete Book of Humanoids. But it
was near the end of the run.
Well, it was one of the later splat books. I think it might have come out in the early mid 90s, so it probably still had a good 6 or 7 year run before the end of second edition. But I think though it was definitely not thought of as being a fully embraced part of second edition, whereas I would say that 3.5 and Pathfinder were like, not only were they releasing the books, but they were like, here's the books and you should definitely play them.
Exactly. It was almost like, here's all these other things, but maybe just look but don't touch.
Mm-hmm. The second edition one also had horrible level limits and class restrictions.
Yeah, it was really gruelingly punishing. Now, 3.5 kind of split the baby on that one, that they gave you all of these other exotic races, but they still punished you a little bit with, I don't recall exactly what ECL stood for, expanded character level or exotic character level.
I think it was called like effective class level or something like that.
Yes, effective character level. That was
character level, yeah. And yes, right. So you had to like buy out your character level.
And there were a couple of ways to do it, that either going into XP debt or, that got complicated. But basically, these other more exotic characters, they tend to be more
So our listening audience can't see Gretchen because we're just doing this as an audio. But Gretchen's face is just looking like more confused and more horrid. She's looking like, oh no, please no.
Dad,
these characters, to explain to people who are out there who have no idea what we're talking about, essentially
explain to Gretchen what you're talking about, and then you'll hit the people who don't know what you're talking about perfectly.
So a second level, second edition or fifth edition, let's just take those two, which are kind of more of the popular editions, you might say. You choose your character race. I mean, including 3.5. So we're talking about the three main ones. But let's say if you're in either of those, you choose your character race, and let's say you choose a Dragonborn versus a human. There's no penalty for choosing a Dragonborn over a human, or there was no penalty for playing a Drow elf over a regular elf in second edition or anything like that. You just started with the same amount of XP, and there was role-playing penalties and challenges and all, of course, but there was no penalty.
It was just left up to the DM to say, no, don't do that.
Yes.
Or sure, go for it.
And in 3.5, they counted those special races as levels. So you actually essentially started with levels towards your character that you had to buy off with experience points.
And admittedly, those characters, they were counted as levels because they were more powerful than the basic set of races.
Right.
Like in the Ravenloft game, our friend Garrett, he's playing an Aasimar. In 3.5, that's, I believe, an ECL +1 or maybe even +2 race, because it has inherent spell-like abilities. It has really good stat modifications. It has some resistances. It's just mechanically, it's simply a better choice.
And other things have solved that problem by giving the benefits, but then also balancing it out with hindrances. And 3.5, instead of giving these wild hindrances, gave the XP penalty, or not a penalty, but a level penalty. So you had to pay that XP back as you adventured, essentially. And I'm not sure exactly how it works. I can't remember.
So convoluted and horrible.
It was, and that's
you gotta
why
like crunch.
one of the. I mean, even I, as much as I like crunch, I didn't like that.
Yeah, this sounds like the kind of crunch you break a tooth on. I mean, come on, man. You gotta like crunch.
You're right. I mean, and if you think an Aasimar is bad, then you take a Centaur, and that's an ECL +5. You're pretty much never getting out of debt.
Yeah, there's somebody in the game that I didn't end up playing after making the 20-hour character, and then so we decided to all share our builds and you know, before we played. And there was one character player I just knew he was a problem before we played, and I was like, I was gonna decide if I was going to play based on what his build looked like at the end to see if he was breaking the game. And yes, the answer was yes, he was breaking the game. And he was playing a fairy. So he's like a fly. It's basically the most cheesy character race you can play in the entire game. It is so absurdly broken.
Well, for those of us who don't know, why is it broken?
It flies. It's almost impossible to hit because small characters in like tiny characters in the earlier editions or in 3rd edition 3.5 have incredible armor class bonuses essentially. So he's impossible to hit. Magic resistance, enhancements to spell casting. It's broken. It's just a broken. It's a broken.
I mean, the flight alone would have made it incredibly problematic in the lower levels, but still add that to all the other stuff, and when you see somebody come out with that build, you know you're playing with capital T, capital G, that guy.
Yeah, that's exactly how it's the most broken character I've ever seen in my life. I just don't think I can play this game if that's what this game is about. And the DM's effective answer was like, yep, that's what this game is about. I was like, no.
Thanks, but no thanks. Nope. And don't get me wrong. I mean, I enjoy system mastery. There's pleasure to be found in both system mastery and setting mastery. I enjoy going through the options and making an interesting character that's going to be the best that it reasonably can be at what I'm wanting it to do. But there's still an upper threshold on that.
Well, that's an interesting question. So let's talk about system mastery as a concept in 3.5 and in Pathfinder, because I think that is, that's an important part of whether or not gameplay is enjoyable. I think that system mastery is critical as well. If you want to run a game, there's nothing better to help a DM run a good game than knowing the system really, really well, because it means you have to railroad the characters way, way less. Because whatever they do, you know the game well enough that you don't have to panic. You can just evolve to whatever they decide to do because you know the game. So you just know the game
quietly.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, or just never prep like me. And but I did prep for last session a little bit. But talk about the system mastery a little bit, because that is a little bit challenging when you have a system that has 1 million books. How do you kind of navigate that sort of component of it? And kind of what do you like about that as far as the challenge of kind of figuring out all these little details and things?
Well, for me, part of why I really enjoy system mastery, it's the ability to pull out tiny niche things that you'd never really expect to need. It's like having extra feathers in your cap that, here's this ridiculously obscure skill challenge. I have a tool for that. It was in this weird book that only came out for 6 months, 27 years ago, but I'm familiar with it. It costs... I mean, hey, the spyglass thing from last night. I thought that I had gotten one. I certainly will get one sooner, next time we have the opportunity. But we've never needed one before. We'll probably never need one again. But system mastery is being able to pull that out when it's necessary. And it's just, again, it's like that hyper-focused interest on a particular thing that the more that you dig into a thing, the more you find out these weird, obscure little facts, and the more that you can pull them out exactly when they're needed. Well, like in Pathfinder, there's a plethora of really inexpensive, on the surface kind of stupid magic items that when you use them correctly, they're amazing. Like, for example, there's a series of feather tokens. They're bird feathers with little painted designs on them, and you throw them on the ground and they turn into something, and which token will determine what it turns into. Feather token tree has been so useful on so many occasions. What it does, you throw it down on the ground and it instantly produces a 20 or 30 foot tall oak tree. It's right there. Okay, cool. Maybe you need it for firewood. That's obvious. Maybe you need to climb it to escape a pack of wolves, whatever. That's fine. Or maybe you hide it under the stage where the bad guy is going to be giving his speech, and then you trigger it with an unseen servant, causing a tree to suddenly grow up through the stage and launch the villain into the wall.
You love Unseen Servant.
Oh yeah, Unseen Servant's great.
Unseen Servant is great. Those little spells are, like you mentioned, I mean, I think that's one of the things, like, you learn.
Yeah. I mean, there's something called the Sleeves of Many Garments. It costs 250 GP. They're basically armband cuffs, and whatever clothes you're wearing, your clothes appear to fit in with whatever your social situation is, and you're always clean. Cool. Awesome.
I think the 3.5 and Pathfinder have great magic items. It's complicated because they have rather than, for the most part, a lot of their magic items are not entirely defined. You essentially create magic items by pairing an object with an effect and a material and deciding the cost and supplies necessary or spells to be able to create the item. And it gets complicated.
I just fell asleep.
Yeah, well, that part of it is not my cup of tea. But I will say,
but that's also homework. That's not what you do in the middle of the game.
No, and
usually.
Yeah, not usually. And it's also very realistic though. Why would there only be like one of the, I love looking at the magic items that are available in second edition, and it's really fun. And there's the Encyclopedia Magica 4-volume set, and it has literally thousands of individual magic items, and you can read through them, and they're awesome. And it's really fun. But it also makes no sense that it would be limited in any way whatsoever, because why wouldn't a wizard create an endless, they would create whatever was necessary for them. It wouldn't be, we are just creating from this list of 20 different cloaks. They would be creating this wide array. And so I think 3.5 and Pathfinder do that really well. Magic is really well done on that.
And it also synergizes well, again, if you're familiar enough with the system. Say, for example, it's not necessarily the most widely known rule, but if your equipment is good enough, it'll give you bonuses on skills. So what I was mentioning earlier with those Sleeves of Many Garments, it gives you clothing that is considered masterwork clothing, which means that you get a +2 bonus to skills to socialize and interact when you're wearing the correct clothing.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's a really fun thing. They started to hit on that a little bit in second edition with the Aurora's Whole Realms Guide, and they published this it's a really fun book. It's still a really great book. I have a copy of it too. I love it. It's the most absurdly different format of any book that came out. They actually made Poor Wizard's Almanac too, is the same style of format, but it's like a newsprint, and it's like a catalog. It's a catalog. And Aurora's Whole Realms catalog, it's supposed to be the catalog for the stores, and the stores are apparently all around the realms, and you can buy these objects. And the objects are cool because they give you little tiny mini bonuses to various skills or abilities. Like, for example, that's how I got the mechanical advantage that is applied for the listening cone that Tick has in my Dragonlance campaign, because it's listed in that book. And it's just a whatever 5 or 10%, whatever it might be.
5%, and it's awesome.
Yeah, and there are all these little things, and there's stuff like that, and that's really fun.
And that's the thing, as much as Gretchen doesn't like crunch, she was able to immediately come back with it's 5%.
She got her one little
because
nut.
it was important.
That one little
because it's added in. It's like right there. Every time I gotta look for my thing, I have my plus 5%. But you know what? When I put those little notes in on my sheets, I kind of forget to mention like where it comes from sometimes. And then I'm really confused why certain numbers, and someone will like you or Rob will look at it and be like, what the hell is going on here? I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah, but we can usually work our way back through it and figure out, okay, well, I see where this number came from and that number and that number. That's weird. Let's come back to that. Okay, I see that when, okay, we've accommodated everything else. This must be that. That's the only thing left. Cool. Okay. You'd mentioned having the problem of knowing, what books and all the different books and where to look and that sort of thing. But that's been taken care of in the SRD. There's a D20 SRD. There's a Pathfinder PFSRD. Yeah. And literally everything that Paizo or WotC, as the case may be, and even a lot of third-party publishers have created for the game, because we have the open gaming license, they've put the mechanics, not the art or the fluff text, but the mechanics for all of these things up on a website that's all really well indexed, incredibly easily searchable. And so, say you want to look for magic items that give skill bonuses. There's a category. You run down the list. Boom. Say you want to look for every second level hunter spell that's ever been published. It's there. There's a link. Go to town.
Yeah, and I can promise you, those SRDs are both fantastic SRDs.
They are.
I mean, they're so good.
What's SRD?
System resource document.
Okay, thank you. You stop talking like you're not talking to me, and like
I'm sorry, Gretchen.
Or you stop talking like you're saying all these letters, and I'm just used to all these numbers, and now I'm just super confused. Like, great, now there's letters.
Yeah, and that's another advantage to 3.5 that isn't yet true for 5th edition, because 5th edition I don't believe is open. It's interesting because when I'm looking for a very specific rule, I can find that rule usually when I'm doing 5th edition, if I'm looking for a specific rule, but it doesn't feel like it's all from one place. Right. I feel like I'm just doing a Google search and some rando is like posting up some specific detail and I can get off, I can figure that out. Whereas 3.5 and earlier, you can pretty much literally find.
Yeah, you can find purple worm and that sort of thing. And
right.
It's all there in one place where you need it. And that's partially due to age, I think, that all the super fans have had time to go through and put everything together.
That's an advantage to those games. I mean, that's something that for example, and when we talked about when we talk about 5th edition later, because it's going to actually air after this one, and we talk with Kat Valentine about it, we talk a little bit about the D&D Beyond, and that has a similar kind of thing where it adds in all the rules for you. You don't have to think about it. You can kind of put together the character, but you also, and it has some free, but you also have to pay for anything beyond the most basic thing. So it's not free yet, really. Whereas the old things, it requires a little bit more footwork, but it is basically all free.
Right. And there's also an appeal too with the older systems that, okay, Pathfinder is still going with the third-party publications, and for that matter, technically so is 3.5 with third-party publishing, but Paizo and WotC, they've completed those runs. And there is a certain amount of comfort and satisfaction in playing a game that everything has been published. You don't have to wonder, well, will the next book that comes out completely invalidate everything that I've been doing?
I'm so glad that you brought that up, because I wanted to welcome you, first of all, to the club of game players who are playing a game that no longer has any support, because I know that's only happened to you in the last couple of years, with
I've been doing that for
second
years.
edition, and I know that was hard for you because you were a big time Pathfinder Society player, and it disrupted that, and you weren't as big of a fan of 2E.
Right. Which, don't get me wrong, I was ready for a new edition. It needed a new edition. Its time had come. Just not that new edition. But anyway, that's a different argument.
Well, I mean, and I'm sort of curious, just in general, how you kind of feel about. I mean, you said there's something comforting about knowing that it's all out there, but it is also a little harder, I think. Like, you had that given, like, I mean, part of the thing, you were playing Pathfinder Society, so you pretty much were guaranteed to have a game or two run by people in the system that is your favorite every weekend.
Yeah.
At a place and eat Mexican food and do that your whole thing that I know that you love to do. And you were, heading up the Pathfinder Society of Savannah, and you got special dice sometimes, and you got little, widgets. I don't know what you get exactly for doing that, but I know you got little things. And then there's
paid in product.
Yeah, well, you got paid in products, but that's cool. I mean, you get cool, you get stuff. People, I like stuff. So,
yeah, totally.
I like stuff.
I like role-playing stuff. Send me some role-playing stuff.
Exactly.
But eventually, of course, you kind of lose that, and I sort of wonder how you feel sort of about the transition from being a game that was pretty recently widely supported to being a game that you kind of now have to make your own game out of. You have to find players like me who are willing to join you on your adventure into the mists of Ravenloft, rather than just any group that is sort of perpetuating itself every weekend, like at Pathfinder Society.
Well, I think part of my case in particular, I got lucky that the pandemic happened. And that's not a sentence I thought I'd ever say. That we all got locked down. Everything shut down. And so there was only a period of a few months between when I stopped doing Pathfinder Society and when Pathfinder Society temporarily stopped. Which, don't get me wrong, they continued. They were releasing scenarios. They were playing online, the whole 9 yards. But it's not the same thing. Pathfinder Society is about meeting together. It's about being around a table. Yes, online is lovely, but it's about the real life, interpersonal stuff. Now, I'm an extreme introvert. Role-playing is pretty much the only social interaction that I voluntarily have. So it, on the one hand, was a big deal in that, yes, I don't like socializing, but I don't want to lose the little bit of socializing that I do like. But now I've got the Tuesday Night Dragonlance game, I've got the Ravenloft game, I've got the random pickup games that we do with the one-offs. So yes, I'm out that regular comfort food element of, okay, I know every Saturday night I'm going to be doing Pathfinder Society. That's not the case anymore, but I still have a regular gaming fix. And I also know that, well, to be honest, if I wanted to start up Pathfinder Society again outside of Paizo, I still have all that material. Bianca has been running D&D at her library off and on for years. It's pretty much a matter of putting up a flyer or putting up a website and saying, hey, I'm going to be running Pathfinder First Ed every other Monday at the library. Come on and show up. And I'm pretty sure that I'd have at least, 6, 8, probably more people than I could handle.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right, especially now with the popularity of gaming and particularly fantasy gaming and anything that's sort of related even, obliquely to Dungeons and Dragons. I mean, I think there's people want to play and somebody that's willing to run a game for them that's pretty much going to get players. It's not what it was years ago. Where you didn't really have a choice and you just kind of took who you could get, and that was often the worst possible dregs of humanity that you were able to get because those were the only people who weren't already in a game. But yeah, you're right. Actually, it's interesting, and we're a little off, and we're kind of, I think, rounding off our discussion at 3.5 and Pathfinder anyway. But you're right in the sense that I think our gaming group, at least the core of the four of us, or 5 of us, I guess I should say. One of us is running the game, and then 4 others.
You count too, Rob.
And then the occasional other players who pop in and out on various games. Actually has become a lot stronger during the pandemic. I think it's given us an opportunity, I think, to try out different games, and certainly we're really consistent. I mean, we are really consistent. I mean, games get called off, but you can pretty much be sure that next week there's going to be another game. Like, it's not.
Yeah, I mean, it's not session 65, and it started when?
Yeah, I mean, it started in January of 2020, and then, so I mean, 65 in a year and a half. It's not bad. I mean, it's not every week.
Not bad at all.
But pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, with Pathfinder Society, yes, it was even more consistent, but it was also consistently casual. I enjoyed it immensely, but I never got so personally involved. It was, it sounds incredibly pretentious, and I don't mean it to be, but for me, DMing Pathfinder Society was performance art. It wasn't a campaign. It wasn't a story. It was me performing to provide the setting that the characters and the players interacted with. And that's just not the same thing that we have on our Tuesday night games or our Saturday night games. We're all together telling stories. And yes, all of us are performing to some degree or another, but it's just not the same thing. In this, with Society, I was focused almost entirely on the enjoyment of other people and deriving my pleasure from their pleasure rather than from the story itself. As far as the story itself goes, I didn't care.
Well, it's also hard. Yeah, I mean, it's also hard though too in those circumstances, because you might not have the same players at the table ever on a week-to-week basis, and also they're not interconnected necessarily. I mean, I know some of the scenarios were interconnected and they would be in multiple parts, but you're not playing a campaign, so you're right to a certain, like, the outcome of that particular scenario doesn't really impact the next scenario, except in the case of like what stuff maybe somebody gets because of having completed that scenario and being able to purchase said items that are in the scenario's reward log.
Now, on a purely cynical basis, I got the same rewards for running the thing, whether the players completed the adventure or not.
That's funny. But I know you made good friends. I know you, like, Bianca played a lot with you, and Bianca's in our group, and we love Bianca. And I know John, too. You played a lot with him. And
Griff,
he's a friend of yours.
Justin,
Griff is great, too. So, yeah, I mean, you make friends and everything like that. I think you're right, though. I mean, I think that's one of the things. I think it is very much a social event. And, when I went, it felt like that. It felt definitely more casual. And I think that's kind of part of it is, like, you're also playing in a store or some sort of location that is not, there's going to be a certain level of distance that you're going to put between yourself and your character, because you're in a public. So whereas I mean, like, you weren't at the 10 Candles game that we played with the group, and we're going to have to play it again so you could be there. People got deeply involved in their characters in that, in a way that you would never get in a game that's in public. Because
no Pathfinder Society that I've ever played or ran has made me cry. Your DMing has made me cry on at least a couple of occasions.
I cried when you carried when your character carried I forget what her name was, up the silver stairs and delivered her to the god, because she had
Morwina?
Merwin.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we don't want to get too deep into it, but basically Merwin had been holding the power of the god of magic within her body and was given the power when she was a teenager, and that's when your character met her, when Amanda's character met her, and then basically a year later in campaign time, and probably 3 years later in 3 years later in campaign time and a year later in actual playtime, they finally caught back up with her. And she was very old because the magic had aged her to like death, basically. And so, your character carried her up the silver stair to the the land of the gods so that she could rest peacefully in like the afterlife. It was so sad.
Oh man.
But that was that, that's what happens when you have the deep campaign where you're really entwined with the characters, and pacing is different in every game. It's interesting because I actually feel like you guys in the Dragonlance game were 60 some sessions in, but I don't feel you're at the same level of depth of connection with the character 60 sessions in this game as you were in the Compass Knights. But I also feel like now you're starting to, because you're out of the progress of character development in second edition is much slower than it is in Pathfinder in 3.5, which is another thing, so I had it at basically every 3 to 4 sessions you were leveling, and everybody levels at the same rate.
Right.
So anyway, interesting.
I'll admit part of that too, I can't help but wonder if that isn't partially a difference of edition too, that having more complicated, crunchy character sheets leads to more complicated, nuanced characters quicker.
That's interesting. I do feel that Gort, my character in your game, my paladin, I love Gort. I mean, like, he feels really...
Gort's awesome.
I love Gort. Gort's really fun. I mean,
Everybody loves Gort.
Everybody loves Gort.
But I mean, I feel like Gort is not just a caricature though either, because like, sure, he has his meat bag and he like kills things and stuff. But then I loved the scene where he took in the were-rat boy and was going to try to like, and how he has this sort of disturbing thing with cannibalism and and like those stories, they feel real to me. It made me feel really uncomfortable last session in the best way, because as you know, I don't mind feeling uncomfortable. I kind of like it. But yeah, that's interesting. I do expect a little bit more depth to emerge in the coming months of the Dragonlance campaign.
I agree, and as well it should. But just consider how long it's taken versus how long it took with Compass Knights. For sure.
Yeah. I would also, it's interesting too, I think, well, I don't know, maybe it's players can make a difference too. I mean, I think...
True.
We had 2 players in the game who are no longer in the game, who there was a player tension involved with one of those players that I think sort of distracted from the depth of connection between the players. And I think that there was a little bit of a wall put up. Plus, we played on Zoom the whole time, and we weren't playing in person until recently.
And add to that too, in the early stages of the Compass Knights, we had so many players passing in and out.
True.
I mean, we probably had maybe 12, 15 players. I mean, never all at once, but maybe even more than that over the course of the campaign entirely.
Carlos, Nick, that other guy, Dylan.
Mitch, Dylan, Anna, Celeste, Nick, Kenneth. Well, Kenneth was there for the most duration, but so many people coming in and out, some of them short term, some of them long term. And the early stages, it took a little time to come together.
I remember we played a session, and we'll wrap up here in a second, but I remember we played a session, and at the time, I don't know how it happened, but we had 8 players, and it was in a living room.
Yeah.
It was at Dylan and Anna, and it was just this giant circle of players. And I remember we sat down and I was looking around and I was like, this is too damn many players.
Yeah. It was in a Pathfinder Giant Slayer campaign, which is one of their adventure paths that had 8 players throughout the entirety of the campaign. And, props to that GM. I don't know how he did it. I couldn't do it.
Oh my God. No, that's just too many.
I could run it, but I don't think it would be as fun for the players because if you think about the way that I look at it is you take an hour of running a game and you divide that hour up into the number of players based on kind of how you want to average the amount of attention that each player gets in a game. And so when you have 4 players, that's 15 minutes per hour, which means there are 45 minutes of each hour that they are not the focal point. That doesn't mean they're not doing anything. You know, oftentimes they might be looking up spells or figuring stuff out or just engaged in what's happening and being interesting. They're not in the spotlight. Yeah. So take that 15 minutes per player when you have 4 and jump that up to 8. You're 7.5 minutes of every hour. That means 52.5 minutes out of every hour they are not in the spotlight. That's a lot of time to ask somebody to sit at a table and not be the spotlight.
Especially
we had 7 for Dragonlance, right? Didn't we have 7 for a while?
No, we had 6 and me, 6. So 7 total at the table.
Total,
brothers. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah, when you consider too, not all players are equally comfortable in the spotlight. And for those of us like myself that are a bit pushier, it's so hard not to inject yourself, even if you're not trying to hog the spotlight, but you still want to make suggestions. You want to help.
Yeah, and so let's say like 2 of those players take 10 minutes instead of their 7.5 minutes. Then you lose 5 minutes of playtime. That's 40 minutes divided by the remaining 6 characters. Then you're even down to less. You're down to 6 minutes and some time per character. It's untenable to me.
Right.
I couldn't, if I was a player, I'd be like, what am I doing here?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like I'm sitting here most of the game doing nothing. Or not doing nothing, but my character is essentially off stage or on the side of the stage, you know, in the back.
I mean, as dedicated as I am to gaming and committed to being there, you know, when I say I'm going to be there, I'll be honest, there were times in that Giant Slayer game that I would never just no call, no show, but there were times when I would, you know, say, you know, no guys, I'm not going to make it this time, just because I knew that I wasn't needed and didn't really want to be there with that many people stuffed into a living room.
Yeah, no, that sounds miserable. It's just no.
Especially since that particular play environment lacked a central table. So we were all playing on our laps.
And you know, and maybe this should be a future episode too, but I also feel like sometimes some gamers have a difference of opinion on what good personal hygiene is. And when you cram that many people into a warming room, I don't know.
We'll talk about that in the gamer etiquette episode. But look, let's wrap this up because we've talked a long time, and I want to be considerate of our listeners who are probably in the midst of a 2-hour podcast right now. But Amanda, thank you so much, by the way, for your input on this, and love. Of course, it's. I was thinking about it. I believe that we have played together. We're getting close to about a decade of playing together, which is
terrifying.
I know. God damn, we're getting just older and older. I mean, we're
older. Yeah.
I was thinking the Compass Knights took 3 years to play through. So I'm like, if I play D&D for another 30 years, I could do 10 more Compass Knights style campaigns. So
there will never be another Compass Knights.
No, I think not. No. That was my campaign that I had always dreamed of. So that was risk fulfillment.
It's the game. It's the one I will never forget.
Yeah, me too. Me feel so good.
And the warm fuzzy. And you know, I also just want to point this out. It wasn't until recently that you actually asked Amanda how she pronounces her last name. So
Plageman. That's a really good point.
Yes,
that's a really good point. Well, and I will say this as though I've made it very clear that second edition is my favorite edition. That Compass Knights game was a 3.5 Pathfinder game, as we've said. So although 2E is my favorite game I've ever played was a 3.5 Pathfinder.
I didn't know it was 3.5.
Yeah, because that's what people were playing then. Because that was before. Actually, that was before I think even 4th edition came out. Because 4th edition was just coming out.
Yeah, 4E came out because 4E was what actually caused Pathfinder.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
Yeah, 4E had been out for about 2 years. Now about 3 years, because Pathfinder had been out for about 1.5 years.
I actually remember early on in that Compass Knights campaign, the 5th edition playtests were happening, And I believe you were involved. Yes.
I was part of the beta testing on that. Yeah.
Yeah, and because I remember you kind of bringing in some stuff to a game and at Donnie's house, and we were just sort of talking about it and everything like that. The good times. Anyway, let's get out of here. Let's move on to the next and final 5th edition. Thanks, Amanda. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Amanda.
Edition Wars.
5E.
All right, so Edition Wars, and we are now to our final segment, which is 5E, the most recent edition for now. I'm sure 6E is very close. It should be. I think so. And we've got Kat Valentine on, and Kat is really active in our local gaming community. In fact, Kat, why don't you kind of let everybody know like what you do, what you're involved in, because it's a lot of things, and I can't possibly do you justice.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I am involved in a lot locally here in Savannah. I manage a lot of the other little pages, our Savannah D&D page, the tabletop RPGs. I think there's a few other ones, but I just kind of make sure that everyone's getting along and that, hey, I'm new. I want to make sure that they're introduced and, have a place to be. And we don't want gamers that are, not going to mesh well into a group, because I don't want someone that's brand new coming in thinking, oh, I don't like D&D because I had a bad experience. So to me, it's such a great way to meet people. It's such a great way to connect and network and just de-stress. So it's something I love doing. And then eventually I ended up in the Nerd Asylum, which is actually a content creation group that heavily focuses on charity streaming. And so this year we've actually managed to get to about over $17,000.
Wow.
Network, and we're still going strong. So we have a lot of fun. We've got a lot of podcasts. We've got a lot of different live streams and a bunch of new ones coming up right now that are from Pokemon to your spooky stuff to 10 Candles, our Wick game right now. We've got an Aridin podcast, which is a Witcher podcast. We've got Vampire the Masquerade. We've got so much talent coming out of this place. It is ridiculous. And I'm really proud because it's growing and anyone can join. So if you guys want to come check us out, you can check us out at thenerdasylum.com. You can check us out on YouTube as well. We're pretty much on all week now, streaming on Twitch. So it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, and I know it's funny because I follow along a little. I mean, I'm old man Rob here in his use of the interwebs, but I enjoy sort of following along in the Facebook pages that you manage, and one of them, there was a new game that you guys were doing. I think it might have been a D&D game, and like you had a ton of applicants. And you're like, oh, tell us a little bit more, actually. No, we can't make a decision. We need more information. And I thought that was kind of cool. And people seemed really engaged, which was neat. So,
yeah, I really cannot wait now that, now we are having that spike again back in COVID. But once things are a lot settled and more people are vaccinated and they feel comfortable that we can, find a better space here in Savannah. That is overall the goal and the dream. We did lose a lot during COVID. We lost the Chromatic Dragon and Jolly Goblin. And all of that space that people want to play, and there's only so many places. So we want to have that place for everyone to be and come play and come check out how to play, and not just D&D, but all different types of tabletop RPGs. Because you might not be into D&D, you might be into Star Wars, you might be into 10 Candles, you might be into what is that, Mad Hatter? Can't think of that. It's such a good one too.
I mean, there's a million Kids on Bikes. There's the zine. There's a lot of zines that are coming out now. Yeah.
I remember basic training, just even playing D&D, like our own little version of D&D through writing, and we would pass these notebooks. It was
Nice.
a great time, but it was a good way to chill out and just have a little adventure while you're embracing the suck, as they say.
That's funny. Well, now I know we had a little bit of back and forth conversation before this podcast, and you were kind of mentioning that you're thinking it's time for a 6th edition, but I brought you on here to be an advocate for 5th edition because I know you're a big time advocate for it. You play it a lot. And actually one of the first sort of contacts I had with you was through when you were operating and sort of managing the Coastal Empire DMs Guild. And one of the things I love that you were doing back then is you were trying to get basically a bunch of DMs together to take turns DMing, so that way nobody ever had to be the forever DM, like this guy right here.
Yeah, and so we have that real, especially like here, and I think it's everywhere right now because people are trying to find things to do, and it's great. You can play Skyrim all day long, but that is as much as you can customize that. You can't decide what your story is. You have to stay within this box, you know, and tabletop RPG just allows that. And 5e is, I think, out of every single one, is the easiest to get into. And that has its pros and its cons, of course.
Well, talk about some of the pros. Like, why do you think it's, you know, what is it about it that makes it, you think, easier to get into than maybe some of the other previous editions?
So we have the term crunchy when it comes to tabletop RPG, meaning it's too much rolling, too much dice, too much, you know, you got to go through all these layers before your turn is done. And so it takes, if you're having that issue where you have that player who, like, I haven't read any of my spells, I've been at this table for 5 minutes, I know it's my turn, and now suddenly, oh yeah, let me read my spells to figure out what I'm going to do, on top of all the crunchy math and the numbers and the adding and the subtracting and, you know, all that. It can be such a turn off because a lot of people don't like combat because of the crunchiness. But 5e, I think, makes it a lot easier, so that instead of doing a listen check like you would in, say, 3.5, and as a DM, you're like, is it a listen check or is it, well, it's kind of this, but it's also, you got a perception check. It's done. It's everything. You don't have to really think about it. It's really simplified a lot of things from 3.5 and Pathfinder. You can literally look into this. You can just come in. I'm a tiefling warlock, done, you know, and your spells are pretty laid out there. The book is pretty intuitive. I know people will look at the books and go, oh, no way, that's too much reading. And I'm like, hold on, you only have to read your section. And it's not as much as you think it is, and you really don't have to read as much. You just get the basic concept, and you can literally just build this and go. And it's so much easier to learn how to play as you go. It is an intimidating book, especially when you have so many, like I do.
Yeah.
But it's nowhere near like Pathfinder or 3. Or any of the other like
Pathfinder's a 600-page book, and I mean, of course, that's the DM's guide and the player's guide together. But you know, it's interesting. One of the things too is that I think that's a really great advantage for 5e is that it has really great internet support. Like, you can use a site like D&D Beyond, and you really don't need to even have the books. You don't even
know anything. I think Wizards of the Coast and D&D Beyond, that just in general, that concept now is so. I mean, we have I don't know if you guys are familiar with Demiplane. Demiplane is great because you can go in. You go daddy son right now.
Well, Lincoln can be in this podcast anytime he wants. So, I mean, the podcast is RPGs and baby makes 3. So, a time a kid doesn't walk in on an episode, there's something going on.
It's true. I'm very familiar with my kids. They'll just be there, and I'm like, "Oh, hi!" Until you get punched. You know not to be in mommy's peripherals. But yeah, I think that. Having all of those things, making it so simplified. Like demiplane.com is great. We joke around a lot. We're really good friends with the creator over at Nerd Asylum, and he's amazing. And it is turned into like Tinder, but like for tabletop RPGs. You do a little thing like, how do you like to game? I like this much combat and this much puzzles and this much, you know, RP. And you get connected with people who are like-minded in that aspect. So you don't have to do that awkward, like, oh, this guy is totally into, you know, running these dungeon crawls, and I'm just not about that. And again, you get into that, I don't want to play anymore, because that is people's perception. But when you come into it, you pair that in with the D&D Beyond, you don't even have to think about it. You just do it and go. And there's so many pre-gen stuff. And I think it's a lot easier for people to just get in and go. You got it on your app now. They're improving everything constantly. They're making it easier. Same thing with Demiplane. They're just making it so you can do everything all there. Your recording, or not your recordings, but your your videos, your maps, your character sheets, your rolls, your dice rolls. You don't even need to have dice anymore. Like it's
and I love that that's one of the things I think is such a great innovation with like something like D&D Beyond is like it does all the math for you. So you literally just click on the thing that your DM tells you that you're supposed to do. So like as a player, you can just go right in, especially a new player, like people like maybe like us who have played a lot and it's become intuitive for us. Like we've gotten used to playing the game. So we can
speak for yourself. All right. We're on session 65 of this Dragonlance game. And I'm still like, what? Huh?
I wasn't going to call you out.
But they still need to work on, for example, like different little like house rules, like how you do your critical hits, whether it's, full damage plus your rolls or double your hits or whatever is going on at the table. There's little things like that where it's like, I wish they'd fix that. Not necessarily an issue. Or like sneak attack damage, for example. That's a whole another issue, especially when you crit. When you crit and you have house rules, that's when the game, the system's kind of a little meh, but they're steadily working on it and improving. I mean, they improve every Thursday. Every Thursday there is a new update.
Yeah, and that's minutia too. I mean, like, even though that's, it's important to people like us who are like long-term gamers and we nerd out and like, we like to customize our games for our own particular table. For like somebody that's new, I think that's something that's really nice. Another thing I really like about it too, as somebody who's like a busy parent, that I like from the way that you build a character in 5th edition is how it incorporates like backgrounds and those kind of traits into the character creation. So like it almost develops a personality for you. So like if you come down and you haven't had, like, let's say you have like a normal life as a parent during the week and you haven't had any time to think about your character, and so you're sitting down to make it.
Yep.
You're like, oh, what am I gonna do?
Slap something together.
Yeah, and like it. Whereas I think
it takes that guesswork out for you.
Totally.
It's there for the new people that like, what do I do? What kind of background do I want to have? It's there. It explains it. It shows you, hey, this is your positive parts about getting this. And it, after a while, I think it does kind of become a bit intuitive after you've done it like once or twice. You're like, okay, like now I get why the background is important. Now I get why, choosing these stats. It's one of those things where I'm like, I never thought I was a power, a min-maxer, because I'm very much like, min-maxing. Looks like someone likes to do combat a lot. But then you get that other person where you're like, why did you build an orc wizard? Why did you do that? For the lore. But you can do that in 5e. Like you can do that and make it work. You can have these weird little combinations, and at that point it's all about the personality on whatever you throw at it.
And I love that too, the background, for gamers who maybe like us who are more experienced gamers, you have that opportunity to like those kind of background things, like they are little descriptions, which I think for me, at least when I've made 5e characters, and I have limited 5e experience, but I have some, and it's provided like a really nice seed. Like it'll kind of get my imagination going, and I'm like, oh yeah, here's this, and this is what that means to me, and like I can kind of start to develop the personality in my head. And so like, a lot of the times I think one of the disadvantages of the older systems is that you would kind of sit out at the table, and it's really like 3, 4, 5 sessions before you really grasp what the character is.
Say more.
Maybe even more.
Because like we said before, it does get to be, like I do love Pathfinder and 3.5 and the fact that as far as 5e goes, like the cons is like you'll always have a tiefling warlock. Like it's just like everybody's a tiefling warlock. It's not even a surprise anymore. Of course the elf rogue, like it's such a staple, but in Pathfinder you have like these I am a witch, super good. I think at one point we had a guy who like put all of his points into listen, and he could hear money. Like it just became a running joke. He's like, "Is there money in that room?" And he's like had like a bajillion points in listen, and it was just ridiculous. And we're like, "Yeah, now you have the ability to hear money." Like, but it would just be such a wonky, like a very specific. And to me, I feel like it's more personal. Like, I am a scientist. I have all the things that I would need for science, and anything else I don't know. I'm just lucky if I happen to know it. But in 5e, you don't. Yeah, you have the tiefling warlock and all that, but the RP aspect, the background, and how you use that. Because again, when you're first starting out, you're like, okay, I'm a folk hero, and this is my little thing. And then by the 5th character, you're like, okay, so I'm a folk hero, but listen up, this is how I became a folk hero. And this is why I have all of this, this is why I have perception as my, expertise, because I'm really good. And these little things, it takes that weight off of you and allows you to go, I'm good at perception, but why? What in my background or what in my character is allowing me to have these abilities? And one of my favorites, I had like a rogue that had really ridiculous high dex, right? And the joke was I had small hands, very small, thin hands. And so you can add that into your RP. Like, yeah, she's good at these things because she's got tiny hands, very thin hands. But for some reason, she couldn't hit. Like, if she was going to physically punch you. And of course, she doesn't have any strength, so it's not even going to hurt. But I couldn't even land a hit. And the joke was that it's because she has these tiny hands. And she's not going to really try to hurt you because these are her money makers. She's not going to try and break her hand on your face, So it adds to that RP, and it adds to that very personal. That's why people get so attached to their characters. Like,
yeah, I was going to say that.
They make so many of them because you're just minding your own business. You're like, yo, but what if an orc was a wizard because he's a half orc, and he's not really strong because he's a half orc, and we know all the lore. And that's the other thing that comes with 5e. The lore is so at a point now. Let's just not talk about spell plague. Let's just pretend that didn't happen. Let's just
well, I think that they've pretended it didn't happen at this
Everyone
point, right?
did.
Yeah.
You put 4E in a box and buried it, and no one talks about it.
We're not even doing a segment on 4E during the edition wars, so there you go.
It's, for people.
Sorry, 4E.
4E there was inherently nothing wrong with it. It's just, again, crunchy, and it was more of a dungeon crawl than it was. It took kind of the flavor and the RPing of it, just took it out, and it kind of just that's why I think it didn't do so well.
I've heard it described as World of Warcraft, the RPG.
Yeah,
and it didn't really feel like
if I wanted to play video game, I would just do it. I wouldn't do my own math on a video game. That's silly. That's homework. I'm not here for this.
Nice.
That's funny.
But yeah, so it does. 5e has a just Dungeons & Dragons has a rich history. I mean, I'm now at a point where I think I know too much. Like, you can ask me about elves, and I'm like, yo, let me tell you about these elves, and let me tell you why drow are the best.
Well, it's funny you mentioned drow. So I have my Mensa Berenchen shirt on right now. But I also, you were talking about, there's always this warlock in the 5e games. Well, so for me with the 2nd edition, which is where my bread and butter is there was always a drow ranger because everybody wanted to play Dritz from the book. So that's kind of funny. I know it's interesting. Now, I want to talk about one thing that I think is the most brilliant sort of mechanical part of 5e that I think is just so great, and that's advantage and disadvantage. I think that for a mechanical thing, that's something that I would add to almost any game. And so for those who don't know what that is, kind of describe what it is, and then, maybe we can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so advantage and disadvantage. So normally you'll have your 20-sided dice you're going to throw to see if you're going to be successful. Like, I'm going to hit you, but I'm a drow, it's daytime, I've blinded because I'm used to being in the dark. So I'm going to have disadvantage trying to hit you because daylight sucks and I'm used to being underground. So you would roll 2 dice, and you'd pick the lesser number of the 2. So that would be your disadvantage. And the same thing would work for advantage. You roll 2 dice, and then you take the higher number, and that would be your actual number. So you get twice the chance to be successful or non-successful. It really sucks when you roll 2 ones.
Well, for sure. But it's really cool, though, because I think it's a really nice, and I think that they've sort of determined that it is essentially a +5 or a -5. I think that, sort of mathematically speaking, and it's a really nice, like you said, it's streamlined because, when you compare it. Right. When you compare it to something like 3.5 Pathfinder, and you're adding up like all these various, like I actually have for my Pathfinder character that I play, it's Gort's cheat sheet, and it's my fighting cheat sheet, and it has like, in this specific circumstance, he gets these bonuses. In this specific circumstance, he gets these. And I have to have this sheet because...
And you have to remember them because you feel like, oh, crap, I forgot to add this. And you still have that in 5e. Especially when you get to higher levels, of course, you'll have that. I do it all the time. Like, oh, crap, I forgot I had all these extra rolls I could have done. Well, tough. It's definitely... It's even as a DM, it takes the guessing work on the other side of the screen where I'm like, okay, so, well, you're a pill, and right, so you're flat-footed, and then, okay, so then you're also carrying this stuff, and you're trying to go to stealth, so you have heavy armor, and then, okay, so that's like
I'm getting ready to have an anxiety attack just hearing you.
You're not a numbers person.
Calm down, Gretchen, calm down.
It'll just turn you off. If you're not into this, you don't want to play because of these little tiny, and in hindsight, after playing 5e for so long, they're definitely now an IDM. I have my own house rules, and I'll take certain things from other previous editions. Like, okay, like
THAC0, like you're taking THAC0, right?
I'll use that all day long because for me, I'm like, bro, you're not like you can use difficult terrain as it, but you're not typical terrain. You are flat-footed, or dude, you just jumped from 3 feet. Yeah, you landed, but you broke your ankle, bro. So you're not running across that field. You're just not. So -5 to your speed or something that would just make sense. And 5e, I think, allows for, once you get into that system and you're understanding it on the other side of the screen, you can make those house rules. And it makes it so much easier because everything else is already done. I don't have to do anything else. I can go, oh, okay, perception, but what's your passive perception? I'm not going to make you roll because you're not actively looking for it. It's something that if you were just walking by, it would be there. Which, by the way, DMs, please, if there's anything you get out of this, please remember that you have passive perception. Know them, so that you're not making your players roll for no reason. And then you get into that awkward, like, I needed you to see that? And you couldn't even roll a simple 10, but their passive perception is 16. You're the jackass now.
That's so funny. Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the things that's great, too. I mean, I think that 5e really allows for that. It's a really good structured, base system, and it allows for a certain level of customization. And I think that even, recent supplements for the game, for 5e, have sort of played into that a little bit. I think that they understand that. The recent Tasha's book, for example, which the Tasha's Cauldron of Everything sort of allowed for more customization. It actually kind of reminds me a little bit of the Skills and Powers books that were released during the 2nd edition, those came out about 6 years into the run of 2nd edition. And I mean, Tasha's came out essentially 6 years into the run of 5th edition. And it was a bit of a precursor to 3rd edition coming out when that came out in 2nd edition. So we were kind of talking a little bit about, and I think that's why you're saying it's time for a 6th edition.
It's time. I feel like we're adding too much now. I mean, again, I love that the fact you start the game, the first thing in the book is like, this is your world. These are the rules. These are more like guidelines. You don't have to, there's certain things that just need to be said sometimes that I'm like, why did it need to be said? Why are we having an announcement? We've already stated this several times. Like, if you don't want your drow to be evil, they don't have to be. And if someone isn't okay with that, they can leave. Like, why are we having this conversation? But yeah, we had the first supplement one, which the one that I really am thinking of is Xanathar, not Xanathars. It has Xanathar in the front. Xanathar. Xanathar Tried Everything was one of the first major books that I can remember that was like, here's extra spells, here's extra things, here's extra characters. And now I, again, go back to D&D Beyond. It's great. Anyone can, hey, check out this thing I made. Check out this class. Check out this subclass. And you have that anything under the freaking sun is out there now.
Right.
And people can make these things, and some of them are awesome balanced, and some of them are broken.
Yeah.
Broken. And it's great. Like, I've created my own class before as well, and it was pretty. It looked great on paper, and then in practice, it was super broken. It was so OP. But it was such a great game that we had when we played it. But anyone can do that because the formula is there, and it's a very simple formula. And now that we're adding so many extra supplements, I think that now 6E would be a great time to start working into it, either simplifying it or being able to branch it off. And I wouldn't say go back a step into like 3.5 and 3E, but kind of, okay, like now that we've got the perception, can we do anything with this skill check? Can we mush it in with something else, or do we need to separate it?
Right.
What did we learn from 5E now that it is accessible everywhere? It's easy to get into. Anyone can do it, from your 6-year-old to your 78-year-old grandma.
Mm-hmm.
It's very easy to get into. So what can we do with it to make it easier so that, hey, I just picked this up, bought it today, and let's just do it. My nephew's been like, hey, teach me how to play. I'm like, okay, it's not that we have to sit down. It's just like, I don't know what level that you want to get into this. Be able to, like,
do you want to mainline it like I am, or do you?
You do want to rig this lifestyle, bro? Because once you go in, you ain't coming out. Video games are going to be subpar. What do you mean I can't go into that village? Why would you even put it on the map? But then you have that DM where, like, I wasn't planning it. Okay, I guess we're doing this now.
Oh, well, Gretchen will tell you my style is basically entirely improv. I don't have any time to prep anymore. I mean, so you have to like learn to figure it out.
You have so many supplements to take from, and I have like never played Curse of Strahd until like recently. Now that I'm in a Curse of Strahd game, I say Curse of Strahd with not asterisk, but quotation marks, because our version of Curse of Strahd is not even close to the book. I think we took the book, we looked through it and threw it out the window. And that was because a lot of our players had already run it,
right,
or played it, so he needed to do something with it that was different, which again, you can look through any book, take whatever you want, puzzles, characters, NPCs that are already done and made for you, and throw something together in 5 minutes, which I've done before. I've taken so many puzzles out of the Curse of Strahd castle portion. It's ridiculous. It's too easy to just take things and throw it together. My favorite way of making things is like, I made an entire little mini campaign based off of my walk from my car all the way to my office at Gulfstream. And just turned it into a whole little thing. Like, there was like, okay, you're gonna get here by boat to the little island, and then you have to go through the underground maze, which was just like me going through cubicles and stuff. And then like you gotta go across a river, and there's like a bunch of like water dragons in there, so you gotta figure out how to go across, which was just a street that you had to cross, and there was constant 2x4s and trucks going through there, and it was kind of like, can I go? Are you gonna kill me? Do you see me? And then going up a mountain, that was me going up the stairs, so it was like you could do so much with it now, and it's so easy to do. And if you don't know how to do it, you can pick up a manual. I have never finished Mines of Pilf. I don't even know.
No, who knows? Forget it.
I've never ever finished it. It's like a 30-page book, but every single time I play with the weirdest people that do the weirdest things, and the whole game derails like quickly, and I'm like, well, I guess we have a campaign now. But that is what is best about those things, is that you can continue to follow that book, or just use it as a reference as you create your own stuff, because you don't really you don't really need to prep. Most DMs I know don't prep. They have 3 things written down for what needs to get done today in this session, and then the rest is up to you weirdos, because you can't plan anymore. I can't plan for whatever my players are going to do, because you think they're going to go left, and then they dig a hole.
Oh my gosh, I know. I have one really, really good note taker in our group, and I'm like, God damn it. Because
oh yeah, his name is Toby. Shut up, Kyle. Shut up.
She's great. She's a great player, but it's also
I love it how you've defaulted to his name is NPC.
Everyone's Toby, Kyle, or Mariah.
Oh my God, that's so funny. Well, look, Kat.
They're all Toby.
I wanna broach another topic here. So 5e, I think this is just such a, people just want to set this stuff on fire right now. So I just kind of want to get a feel for how you view it. To put it in one person's terminology, 5e is really becoming this woke culture, and it's just really getting annoying because it's all cancel culture now. And so tell me, what do you feel about this?
I think in this aspect, because I'm very much definitely pros and cons for cancel culture, but you don't need to politicize this game, because at that point you become a gatekeeper, and I'm 100% will kick you in the face if you're a gatekeeper, because this is supposed to be a game for everybody to play how they want to play. So again, if this person says drow are evil because lore says they're evil, whether it's my lore, whether it's D&D lore, and if you're not okay with that, let's have a conversation. It should be a conversation, not an automatic, well, you're racist. It blows my mind, because I'd be like, okay, dwarves are evil. Are you saying I hate midgets? Like,
God.
Like, we don't need that kind of gatekeeping in this. And we fought so hard as far as being a female in this industry and in general in the gaming world. I've been to places where I can't play because I'm a girl, or I have to play a girl. I can't play a female or a male if I wanted to. Or if someone wants to come to the table and be like, I want to be asexual and genderless, non-binary. I'm like, cool. Do you want to be that as an elf? Do you want to be that as a warforged? Like, what's going on? Like, it should be an open conversation with your DM. And as a DM, you have to be open to these things, because okay, drow are evil, but I don't want to be an evil drow. Okay, so let's come up with what's going on. What happened to your character? This is a chance to be creative for both parties and bring something different to the table. I had a really great time making a really odd character that was a half-orc drow. And it was just an interesting little thing that we had for a little while. And it was fun because that character was just oblivious. He had no idea that his people were evil. He's like, both? My parents were evil? No way, they're the nicest people. Like, and it was this world where I was like, I didn't want it to be evil, but I was like, you know what? This could be a great chance for a story. This could be a great chance to explore these things, explore that racist tension, because we do live in a world that has it. If you want to bring it to the table, let's do it in a safe way where people can have these conversations, because I've had players that don't speak English very well. Cool. 3 other players spoke Spanish. So it turned into, oh, that's just the Elven language now.
Oh, nice.
All understand each other. And I'm gonna get teary up. Like, their English improved over the year, and just over 3 months. And everyone was learning. Like, it was just a great opportunity to share in a real life culture and in a fake world, in a made up world. So it's just, gatekeeping needs to stop. We're in 2021. We don't need the neckbeards telling us we can't play, how we can play. And if you're a player in a position where your DM's a dick, come to the Nerd Asylum. We will take care of you. You can come see me, and we don't have to deal with that. We don't have to deal with that. There's so many other players that want you at their table.
Right.
So many DMs that want you and what you have to bring to the table. We don't need the gatekeeping, and it's fine to bring politics. It's fine to bring in real world problems into your D&D world, because you're gonna have real world problems, or humanoids. That's what they do. It brings good story. It does. It brings great story. I had a wonderful game where we were all basically forced into marriage really early on, and my character was gay, and it was super not looked great on, and it was a fun way to explore that. And I was like, you know what? I actually learned something from that. Like, my DM kind of flipped it on me, and I was like, I learned something there. Like, okay, that's a different point of view that I didn't think of before. And I'm glad that I had played and got to see the other side of like why people would think this way. I'm like, okay, see, we all learned something, and we had a great discussion afterwards. And so much of that you take away when you dance around it, I think. It's just, also, are your players happy? Are they safe? Or is everyone having fun?
So you also went into that game knowing that that's what you were getting into. So I think what I'm kind of gathering here is making sure the ground rules, session 0, like everything is laid out and you're agreeing to it and you understand like this is how it's going to go.
And being comfortable enough to say, I'm not comfortable with what's happening right now. I'm not comfortable with this scene. Son, please don't be naked.
Hey, Lincoln.
Be right back. I'm gonna go find some underpants really quick. Come on, son.
I have noticed our Lincoln is starting to become a little adverse to clothing, so we're gonna see how that goes.
Well, on that note, let's round off here. Kat, one last time, thank you first of all for coming on, and for those who might be interested again in getting involved in Nerd Asylum, you mentioned Demiplane, people that want to just kind of connect with what you are up to. What's the best way for people to do that? How can people sort of get involved in the things that all the projects you're involved with?
So if you are local to the Savannah, I'm adminning pretty much anything or monitoring anything that is involving D&D, RPG, tabletop gaming stuff. You can reach out to me there. You can also check out our Discord, which is the Nerd Asylum. You can also check out thenerdasylum.com. You can check out YouTube, which is the Nerd Asylum. You can check out Twitter, all the social medias, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I'm admin for the Nerd Asylum, so you will find me. I will be there. I'm everywhere. It's really hard to not find me. You can look me up on Facebook, my Kat Valentine page as well. Twitch as well. We'll be live tonight, Mondays, every other Monday. Oh man, I'm on too many stuff. I'm in like 6 projects.
Well, and I just want everybody out there to know that, Kat, that you are hearing right now, this is Kat's persona on all of those sites too. Very friendly, very open. So don't be afraid to reach out. Kat, we really appreciate you coming on and talking about 5e today. It's great to kind of really meet you in person for the first time, sort of. So really appreciate it.
No, I really appreciate having you guys.
So is it 3.5 and Pathfinder, or is it 3.5 Pathfinder?
So 3.5, as Amanda explained when we were talking about it.
I zoned out. I must have not heard that one.
3.5, when D&D decided to make 4th edition, people were not ready for 4th edition. So Paizo, the game company, decided, you have an open license, we're going to make 3.75, essentially. They made a slightly advanced version of 3.5, which is Pathfinder.
Okay.
So they're mechanically so similar as to be almost indistinguishable. I mean, you can essentially pull one and use it in the other, and it's totally fine for the most part. So that's kind of why we put those two together. And I hope you all enjoyed that. That was epic. Do you have any conclusions that you want to draw from those discussions of the various editions? The edition wars? Who won the edition wars?
Well, so I just finally had a chance to play 5e with your nephew, which was amazing, and we'll talk about that in a bonus pod, I think.
Yeah, bonus pod.
And I liked how everything was in front of me and set out before me. It was like you show up at home and your child has done the dishes and made dinner and done the laundry and the house is clean. And it was just, you walk straight into it and it's easy.
So it's a game that doesn't exist?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was nice. We had the introductory set, the starter set, so we had pre-made characters.
Okay.
And all
and
that.
you know what? I know this has been a long time. People are tired of listening to people. That D20 that came with the starter set rolled more ones than I have ever seen in an entire game. Get your own die.
Okay, that's to be addressed on a future bonus pod. But okay, I'm going to kind of draw a conclusion here. Having listened to all of those. Now, I have my obvious preference of AD&D 2nd edition, but let me just say this. Dungeons & Dragons is awesome. You cannot go wrong. There is no edition war. Everybody that's out there, if you're arguing with people about there being one better than the other, just stop.
It's stupid.
Because you know what? Whatever people like, it's awesome. It's all D&D.
It's like bickering over what kind of cake's the best cake.
Well, and you might have a preference.
It's still cake.
Yeah, but you might have a preference as to what cake you
I'll
like
eat
the
any
most.
kind of cake.
But after talking to these people about the games that they loved, they were totally passionate about it. They were as awesome gamers, awesome into D&D as anybody else that I've played with or known. And they all had their specific reasons for why they liked it. And I loved all of the people we spoke to. There is none that are better than the other. If that's the one you love it. Just love it. Just be into it. Who cares?
Who cares?
There's no edition war.
No.
Everybody wins. It's like we're all ordering off the same menu and it's delicious.
The D&D menu.
So what we're taking out of this, just go and play some D&D. If you like D&D,
have some freaking fun.
seriously, go have some fun, play some D&D.
Use your brain meats and make the imagination happen.
Yep. And if one edition doesn't work out for you, try another one. If you like the fantasy genre, you're probably going to find something that you like out
math? Go to 5e. Just straight up go to 5e. Don't try any of the others. 5e. Start
Love
there.
math, do 2e.
Nah, I think Pathfinder 3.5.
Yeah, okay, maybe. There's a lot of skills.
There's a lot of numbers.
Compounding numbers.
So many numbers.
Lots of numbers.
So many numbers.
You know what's a high number? The amount of minutes this episode has gone on.
You're
So
right.
let's
We should
get out
head
of
out.
here. If you have some thoughts on this, please email us at rpgsandbabymakes3@gmail.com, which we will about to say in a pre-recorded message right after I'm done talking. Again, subscribe to the podcast. Subscribe on YouTube. Give us a like. Leave some comments. Subscribe on Apple Music. Listen to it on Spotify. Subscribe to our channel. Wherever you get this content, please subscribe. Leave us good reviews. We would greatly appreciate it. And we can't wait to talk to you again soon. Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, and just go eat that cake.
Eat the cake.
All the cake.
I want some cake now.
Me too.
We don't have any cake, do we?
Not today, but probably in the next couple of days.
Happy birthday to
you. Happy birthday to you.
RPGs and Baby Makes 3 is a production of Gretchen and Rob sitting on their couch. Email the show at rpgsandbabymakes3@gmail.com. You can find more episodes on Podbean, Spotify, and iTunes, as well as on our free Patreon page at patreon.com/RPGs and Baby Makes 3.